What's up, guys? Trevor here. Bigfoot has been part of campfire stories and local legends for decades, but some sightings are far more terrifying than others. The encounters you're about to hear go beyond strange sounds in the woods and distant shadows between the trees. They involve hikers who came face to face with something they could never explain. Join me as we dive into the most terrifying Bigfoot sightings caught by hikers. You won't believe what I just watched. My own camera caught Bigfoot just 10 feet away, and I had no idea the Sasquatch was even there. Every second of that footage is pure terror, but it's the moment in the trees that still haunts me, because I almost made a brutal mistake. I'm watching the clip from the beginning, and the trail looks empty. Clear sky through the canopy, maybe 60 degrees. The kind of October morning that makes you feel like you own the forest. My footsteps are steady. My breathing is calm. The GoPro captures everything with the crisp indifference of a machine that doesn't feel fear. And right there in the frame behind me, in the 10th minute, 43 seconds, about 40 yards away, something is standing completely still in the tree line. I didn't see it when I was walking. I see it now. Tall, dark, built like something that has never once been afraid of anything alive. Bigfoot had already been there for who knows how long, watching me move down that trail like it, was studying how I walked. The shape of it is wrong in a way that's hard to explain without sounding like you've lost your mind. It wasn't the silhouette of a bear. It wasn't the broken canopy playing tricks on shadows. Sasquatch was upright, composed, and deliberately positioned just far enough inside the tree line to be invisible, unless you knew exactly what to look for. I've gone back to that frame dozens of times now, zooming in until the image breaks apart into pixels. And every time I come back to the same conclusion. Whatever was standing there, it had chosen that spot on purpose. There was nothing accidental about its position. The angle, the cover, the stillness, that takes thought. Back on the trail in real time, I had no idea. The footage shows me walking at a comfortable pace, occasionally glancing at the ground to watch my footing, pausing once to check my phone for a signal that wasn't there. Standard stuff, but the audio on the GoPro is better than I remembered. And when I crank the volume and listen closely, I can already hear it. Faint but rhythmic low-frequency clicks coming from somewhere in the trees to my left. It wasn't birds nor insects. It was something deliberate, the kind of sound that lives at the bottom of your ear before it registers as a sound at all. Was that click meant to warn me or lure me? I remember stopping. The footage confirms it. I planted both feet and stood there for almost 20 seconds, head tilted, scanning the tree line to my left. Nothing moved. Nothing was visible. And here's what gets me when I watch it back now. I was looking in exactly the wrong direction. Based on Bigfoot's position the first time the camera caught a glimpse of it, I have a feeling that the Sasquatch was behind me and slightly right, motionless, watching me search for it in the wrong quadrant of forest. I was so confident in my instincts pointing me left that I never thought to turn fully around. Sasquatch used that. Whether it was conscious misdirection or just patience, the result was the same. I looked, found nothing, and kept walking. That's when I reached up and adjusted the GoPro. The clip shows my hand crossing the lens, and for half a second, the camera tilts upward at about 30 degrees, catching the mid-canopy instead of the trail. And I have watched that half-second frame by frame more times than I can count, because that's when Bigfoot appears again. Higher now, not on the ground. Sasquatch is in the lower branches of a large oak, maybe 40 feet off the trail, perched in a position that makes zero anatomical sense for something that must weigh upward of 500 pounds. But there it is. And the face. The face is what I can't let go of. It's turned directly toward the camera, not toward me, toward the lens, as if it understood what the lens was. The eyes are deep set and dark, and there is nothing blank about them. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Bigfoot looked like it was thinking. I reattached the mount. The camera leveled back out, and the trail snapped back into frame. And immediately, the clicking returned. But this time, it was louder. The gap between each click had shortened, or maybe it was coming from closer, or both. My body language in the footage shifts visibly. My shoulders come up half an inch. My stride gets tighter. I start scanning left and right with short glances instead of steady forward focus. I know that posture. That's the posture of someone whose nervous system is sending massive red flags that their conscious brain hasn't sorted into words yet. I think that's the moment my instincts started clocking in ahead of my thoughts. I just hadn't caught up yet, and Bigfoot was still right there behind me, closing the gap by degrees. How much closer could it get before I realized I was being hunted? I've spent time in thick backcountry. I've camped alone at elevation, hiked out at 3 in the morning, navigated by feel more than once. The woods have never made me feel small. That changed on this trail, on this morning, and I can pinpoint the exact moment in the footage, the moment my stride broke. Not a stumble, not a stop. Just a half-second hesitation in the rhythm, the kind your body makes when the math stops adding up. One foot came down a little softer than it should have. I picked up my pace. Not running, not yet, but moving with the kind of urgency that doesn't come from logic. It comes from somewhere older than logic. The footage starts to shake now. Not badly, just enough to tell you the gait has changed. I'm moving somewhere between a fast walk and a trot, and my head is doing that thing where it keeps flicking backward without fully committing to a look. I remember the feeling exactly. I wanted to look back, and I didn't want to look back, because somewhere in the meat of my brain, I already suspected that looking back would show me something I couldn't unsee. So I kept moving, and Bigfoot kept moving too. What happens next in the footage is the part I had to watch 4 times before I could accept what I was seeing. I had pushed my pace up to something close to a jog, and the camera was bobbing enough to make the background choppy, but not so choppy that you miss it. Behind me, maybe 30 feet back, a shape moves between 2 tree trunks. One smooth, unhurried stride. The spacing between those trunks was at least 8 feet across. Bigfoot cleared that gap in a single step. Not a leap, but just a step. And in the brief moment when the shape was fully visible between the trees, upright, broad, moving with the fluid indifference of something that does not need to rush, I could see it wasn't running. It was walking, just walking, keeping pace with a human jogging. I honestly think, watching it now, that Bigfoot could have caught me whenever it decided to. It was toying with me. That's the thought that sits in my chest like a stone. Was this predator simply patient, or testing me for something worse? Growing up Navajo, I'd been taught to trust the land and to respect what watches from it. Something about the clicks and low rustles behind me set my nerves screaming. I knew this forest better than most. Every fallen log, every narrow deer path was mapped in my head. If I stayed on the main paved trail, it would take at least 20 minutes to reach the parking area. But cutting through this older, tighter forest, I could shave off almost 10 minutes. 10 minutes didn't seem like much, but when Bigfoot is closing in at a pace you can't measure, 10 minutes could be the difference between getting out and getting caught. I made the turn without hesitation, but it wasn't just instinct. My feet carried me left before my mind even fully caught up. I cut hard off the main trail. There's a deer path I've used before, cuts diagonally through a section of older forest and shaves almost a quarter mile off the route back to the parking area. Tighter canopy, rougher ground, but faster if you know it. I knew it. I took it without slowing down, ducking the first low branch by memory and hitting the uneven ground of the old deer path at full stride. The terrain got worse immediately. Exposed roots, soft spots where the soil had gone damp from a creek runoff somewhere below. Branches at shin level that caught my feet if I wasn't lifting high enough. The GoPro captured all of it, the world swinging and jerking as I worked through the brush, my breathing now audible on the mic, ragged but controlled. And then the clicking stopped. Just stopped. Mid-sequence, as if a switch had been thrown. And the silence that replaced it was worse. Because silence in a forest that has been making sound means something decided to go quiet. I felt the change in the air before I processed the audio shift. Everything around me became very still in the way that prey animals go still when something large has just entered. Their space. What filled the silence instead was something lower, a rhythmic sound I don't have a clean word for. Not a vocalization, not a knock. More like a deep, resonant pressure that hit the chest before the ears. It was spaced out and deliberate. It felt less like communication and more like the sound of something that knew I could hear it and wanted me to know that. I'm not someone who leans into the dramatic, but I will say this plainly. It felt like Bigfoot was controlling the pace. Like the Sasquatch had shifted from observation to something more intentional and was marking time as it came. Was it orchestrating my every move, step by step? I was moving hard through the deer path when I made my worst decision. I slowed down, just a fraction, just enough to try to get a bearing on where the sound was coming from. And in that half second of reduced speed, I turned my head back over my left shoulder. The camera caught what my eyes caught. Bigfoot was there, not 30 feet back this time, not a silhouette between trees. Close enough that I could make out the mass of it moving through the brush toward me with a kind of steady, ground-eating locomotion that looked nothing like a run, but covered ground like one. Sasquatch wasn't hesitating. It wasn't stopping to observe. It was advancing. And the distance between us had collapsed to something that made the word escape feel suddenly fragile. I took off in a full sprint. No more pacing, no more managing my footing on the uneven ground. I just went, and I accepted every stumble and root catch as the cost of forward motion. The GoPro footage from this stretch is chaotic. Sky, ground, branches, blur. But there are frames where the background stabilizes just long enough to see behind me. And in 2 of those frames, Bigfoot is visible, moving through the brush in long, smooth strides, angled toward me, not away. Sasquatch wasn't spooked by the sprint. It responded to it. The pace increased. There was no frantic energy in those strides, no sign of exertion, just the mechanical, metronomic movement of something that was built for this, in terrain that it had known far longer than I had. And the scariest part? He was 10 feet away from me. I've never felt fear like that in my life. I want to be specific about that. I've been in situations in the backcountry that were objectively more dangerous. A rockfall at elevation, a flash flood in a desert canyon, a close encounter with a black bear that ended fine but escalated fast. In all of those, the fear was manageable because the threat followed rules I understood. This was different. This was the specific terror of being pursued by something that was better at the terrain than I was, faster than I was, and not behaving like anything I had a category for. How do you survive when the rules themselves have changed? Then the rocks started. The first one hit the ground to my right with a crack that I felt in my teeth. Not a random falling branch, not a tumbling stone dislodged by movement upstream. It came in from the side, horizontal, at knee height, and struck a root hard enough to split it. I didn't stop. The second one caught my shoulder. It wasn't massive, maybe the size of a baseball, but it hit with enough force to send a spike of pain down into my elbow and throw my balance just enough to make me grab a sapling for support. I used the sapling to pivot and keep my momentum going without going down. The third one caught me in the upper back, mid-stride, and that one nearly buckled me. Bigfoot was throwing them, not rolling them, not kicking them loose. Full on, actually throwing them. Overhead with accuracy, while in motion through heavy brush. I can't tell you exactly how I know the difference, but I know it the same way you know when a punch is aimed versus when it's wild. The rocks were landing in front of me, and beside me, and behind me, and the pattern wasn't random scatter, it was bracketing. Sasquatch was boxing in my path, throwing ahead of where I was headed to steer me. I stumbled over a root, went down on one knee, got back up in what felt like the same motion, and kept running. That's when it landed. Not as a thought at first, more as a sensation, a wrongness in the geometry of where I was versus where I should have been. I'd been running this deer path for almost 4 minutes, and I should have been breaking into the secondary fire road by now. I should have been able to see the open sky ahead through the canopy thinning. Instead, the trees were getting denser. The ground was rising. I was heading northeast instead of northwest, and the only way I had gotten there was by following the path of least resistance. When the rocks came in from the sides, had I already been trapped without realizing it? I wasn't escaping. I was being steered. Every time I'd had to dodge right when a rock hit my left when one hit ahead of me to the right. I had turned, incrementally away from the exit. Sasquatch hadn't been trying to hit me cleanly. It had been redirecting me. The rocks were a herding tool. I was deep in the denser section of the forest now, the canopy thick enough that it had dropped the ambient light by a full level, and I had zero visual on any recognizable landmark. I was exactly where Bigfoot wanted me, and it stopped feeling like a chase. it started feeling like something else, something with an endpoint where I am deep in the forest, dead. I forced myself to stop running and think for 3 seconds. 3 seconds, which felt like 3 hours. I pulled up the mental map of the area. The creek ran south, the ridge was east, the parking lot was west and low. I needed to go downhill and left, regardless of what that put between me and whatever was in those trees. I adjusted course, pushing through brush now, instead of following the path, taking the harder route, because the harder route was the right one. Then the rocks stopped entirely, and Bigfoot closed the distance. I know this because I heard it. Not footsteps, not snapping branches, but a single heavy impact on the ground, maybe 15 feet behind me, like something had dropped its full weight forward in one lunge. The sound was so massive and so close that my legs nearly gave out. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I just pushed every last thing I had into my legs and ran harder than I have ever run in my life. And the GoPro footage confirms it. The camera shaking so violently that only every 4th or 5th frame is even decipherable. Was I about to find out just how close it could really get? The footage shows me stumbling badly over an exposed root, catching myself on a tree trunk with my forearm hard enough to leave a bruise that still hurts as I watch this. What the mic caught at that exact moment is something I've had to listen to a dozen times to fully accept. A sound directly behind me, guttural and low. Not a roar, not a scream, just a single deep exhalation of something that was right there. Not 30 feet back, not 20, it was right there. The GoPro audio puts it at maybe 8 feet. If I had gone down on that route, I don't think I would have gotten back up. I hit a slope without warning and went with it, half running, half sliding down a 15-foot grade of loose shale and dead leaves, grabbing at anything to stay upright. My right knee went into the ground, came back up, and I was still moving. That's what the body does when everything else switches off. The slope angled me south, and I took it, because south was away, and away was the only direction that mattered. Behind me on that slope, the footage catches a shape dropping into the upper edge of the frame. Not sliding, not stumbling. It was controlled. Sasquatch came down that grade like it had done it 1,000 times. The trees thinned just slightly ahead. Not a clearing, just older growth with more space between trunks. And I hit that section at full sprint. That's when Bigfoot made its move. The footage shows a shadow crossing fast from my right, cutting in at an angle, closing the gap with sudden acceleration I hadn't seen from it before. Sasquatch had been pacing itself. The whole time, it had been pacing itself, and now it wasn't. Could I survive a sudden burst from something built to outlast me? But before we get into that, you need to see this, because I found something else while watching this footage. Evidence and more discoveries that I can't put on YouTube. Things that were taken down, ignored, or completely removed. I gathered everything into one file. If you want to see it, it's in the description. Now back to the story. I screamed. Didn't plan to. It just came out, raw and primal, captured perfectly on the GoPro mic. I cut left so hard my feet nearly crossed, and I almost went down, barely staying upright, through something closer to controlled falling than running. Bigfoot adjusted instantly. The footage shows the shadow shifting course to match me, the gap now under 20 feet, the canopy shaking from its movement overhead in one frame. Overhead, like it had used a low branch as a pivot point. The geometry of it didn't make sense for something that size, and it didn't matter because it was happening. My lungs were burning in a way I hadn't felt ever. The footing was wet from creek drainage seeping up through the soil, and every third step my foot slid before catching. I could feel Bigfoot back there, not as a sound anymore, but as pressure. The way air moves differently when something large displaces it. Sasquatch was close enough that I could feel the wake of it. I've told people this, and they look at me like I'm exaggerating. I'm not. A branch caught me across the face, one I ran directly into at full speed, split my lower lip, and filled my mouth with blood. I didn't slow down. My vision went briefly white at the edges, and I didn't slow down. The footage from this stretch is almost unusable, just violent shaking and strobing light through branches, but in one clear frame, you can see Bigfoot's arm, not its whole body. Its arm extended, reaching. It was close enough to reach. That frame is the one I can barely look at because the hand is open. I would have been gone. I don't know if I made a sound when I saw what was ahead. A gray light through the trees, diffuse, flat, the specific quality of light that means open sky and open ground. A clearing. I hit the brush at the edge without slowing, ducked under a low branch by instinct, and exploded out the other side at a dead sprint and ran directly into a human being. The collision was violent. I hit him shoulder first at full running speed, and we both went down, him backwards into a tarp of gear, me rolling hard over his torso and landing on my hands in the dirt. Two other men spun around at the sound, and for one suspended second everybody froze. Me on the ground, blood on my lip, chest heaving, him flat on his back in his own equipment, the other two with their hands halfway to things at their hips. The gear on the tarp was not recreational. Poachers, mid-setup, and I had crashed into the middle of their operation like a man falling out of the sky. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then one of them barked something low at the others, and they all turned toward the tree line I'd just come through. I turned too. Nothing. No sound. No movement. No shape at the edge of the clearing. Bigfoot was gone. Fully, completely gone. As if the sight of armed humans had ended the calculation mid-step. I stood there with my hands shaking and understood with total clarity that I had not made it out because I outran something. I made it out because something decided to stop. I pulled the footage that night. I watched it 3 times straight through and couldn't sleep. What I found in those early frames, Bigfoot already there, 10 feet behind me. Watching didn't shock me. What shocked me was the last frame. Sasquatch in the trees, eyes locked on me, arm reaching forward as if it could snatch me at any second. Watching it now, I can still feel that intent pressing in. And I know, if I'd hesitated for even a second, Bigfoot would have finished the job. That's the part that haunts me. The corridor had been extraordinary before any of this. 40 miles of mid-Atlantic backcountry, 14 cameras at the natural choke points, and 10 weeks of weekly Bigfoot hits on the eastern ridge that were unlike anything in my prior documentation. The standout clip was a figure moving through dense brush at 30 feet, 7.5 to 8 feet tall, stride long and completely unhurried, passing through lower vegetation without disturbing a single branch below chest height. Something that size in that density of cover, leaving nothing below it disturbed. It moves like something that has never once encountered a threat it couldn't simply be larger than. That is what was living in this corridor before the hunters arrived. The first sign wasn't a new animal on camera, it was a behavior change in one already there. Eastern Ridge Camera, Week 10, last confirmed Bigfoot hit on this grid. The stride is shorter than every prior clip on that camera. The cadence is faster. That loose, unhurried quality is gone, replaced by something tight and deliberate. The movement of an animal that has already processed a threat and is executing a response to it. This Bigfoot had registered something days before any of my cameras picked up a single frame of what was causing it. 4 days after that clip, the hunters appeared. From that point forward, the eastern ridge was silent. 10 weeks of consistent hits, erased in 4 days. By the time my cameras caught the first frame of what was doing it, the Bigfoots had already been running. What I remember about that hike in order to pull the first cards is the quiet, not the comfortable quiet of low wind and still air, a different kind entirely. No squirrel movement in the canopy, no woodpecker work on the dead timber along the ridge. My own footfall was the loudest thing out there, which in terrain this dense is not how it's supposed to feel. I've walked into forests after large predator activity before, and there's a signature to it. A collective stillness, like everything breathing in and forgetting to breathe back out. This felt like that, except spread across miles rather than yards. Walking through that silence toward my first camera pull, I had the uncomfortable sense that whatever had caused it wasn't finished, that it was still out there, further south, and the silence around me was the evidence of everything it had already passed through on its way there. The first hunter hit came through at just before 2 in the morning, wide through, the chest and shoulders in a way that registered before anything else, the kind of build that pushes against the edges of the shot in a way that feels wrong before you've consciously identified why. Moving south, fast, and completely straight. No deviation toward any scent marker. No engagement with food sources I knew from 10 weeks of monitoring were actively used in this area. No acknowledgement of anything that wasn't directly on its heading. An animal moving through territory engages with it. An animal holding a hunting heading ignores all of it. This one moved through 10 weeks of documented wildlife activity like none of it existed. Not distracted, not unaware. simply uninterested, because everything in this corridor that wasn't the thing it was tracking had already been categorized as irrelevant. That single behavioral detail, the complete dismissal of everything in its environment that wasn't its target, told me more about what this animal was than the size or the build did. This wasn't a predator moving through unfamiliar terrain. This was a predator executing a plan it had already made in a corridor it had already decided belonged to it. Going back through the cards from cameras further north, I found what I had flagged as anomalous and set aside. Same build, same window between 1 and 3 in the morning, same southward heading, 3 consecutive weeks of near-nightly movement before I had understood what I was looking at. What unsettled me later was realizing that across 14 cameras and 3 weeks of footage, not once did either animal repeat the same exact foot placement through a choke point, which meant they weren't just moving through the corridor, they were actively avoiding leaving a pattern. 3 weeks. This animal had been running this corridor for 3 weeks before the Bigfoot stopped showing up on the eastern cameras. The prey had registered it before any piece of equipment I had placed in this terrain did. They were already running while I was still reviewing footage and calling it inconclusive. And sitting with that now makes the whole sequence feel different. Not a sudden disruption, but a slow, patient pressure applied from the north for weeks before anything on my cards showed its shape. The next camera south gave me the clip that changed how I read everything that followed. Just after 2 in the morning, large animal through the frame, and what hit me first wasn't the size or the build, it was the absence. Every Bigfoot I have ever captured on a trail camera has responded to the housing, slowed, turned, investigated the scent around the mount. Every single one across years of running grids in terrain like this. This animal moved through like the camera didn't exist, not because it couldn't smell it, because whatever it was tracking further south had its complete attention, and a trail camera on a tree wasn't worth the cost of a single second. I've seen focused animals before, watched predators lock onto prey and filter everything else out. But there's a threshold past which that focus stops resembling instinct and starts resembling something uncomfortably deliberate, and this clip was well past it. The indifference wasn't the indifference of a distracted animal. It was the indifference of something so completely inside a decision it had already made that the world outside that decision had ceased to be relevant input. Standing at that mount with the trees from the clip 30 yards behind me, I tried to work out what the timeline looked like from the Bigfoot's perspective. It had registered this animal weeks before my cameras did, and had been moving south in response while I was still calling things inconclusive. The animal from the early weeks, the one that moved through dense brush without disturbing a branch, that had never needed to be afraid of anything, had spent weeks moving through its own terrain with something behind it that it couldn't outrank. That thought hasn't left me since. The camera after that gave me 2 hits on consecutive nights. Same build, same heading, and the second clip ran long enough to read the full proportions clearly for the first time. Wide through the chest and shoulders, shorter in the leg relative to the torso than a Bigfoot's proportions. Mass sitting lower and heavier, center of gravity closer to the ground than anything in my reference footage. A profile I had no analog for anywhere in years of documentation. What struck me wasn't just the size, it was the sureness. Every step placed with a precision that spoke to an animal that had run this trail many times, that had built an intimate familiarity with every dip and root and soft patch of ground across weeks of nightly use. Not an animal moving through unfamiliar terrain. An animal moving through terrain it had already decided was its own, with the ease of something that made that decision long ago and hadn't reconsidered it once. And somewhere, ahead of it on that same trail, a Bigfoot that had owned this corridor for 10 weeks was still trying to stay far enough in front of it to survive. Between the next 2 camera pulls, I found the bedding site. Compressed vegetation in a shallow depression, hair on bark at 9 feet, and again at 7.5. Weeks of accumulated disturbance from consistent return visits. The hair caught on the bark at 9 feet wasn't snagged the way it usually is when something brushes past. It had been pulled free in a single direction, the kind of mark you see when something leaves faster than it planned to. Something had been sleeping here regularly, comfortably enough to maintain a long-term rest site deep in the corridor. But the edges told a different story, not the gradual, settled character of a site vacated naturally, pushed outward fast in a single direction, the physical record of something cleared in one movement. This hadn't been abandoned. It had been evacuated, and the direction it had been evacuated in was south. The Bigfoots in this corridor hadn't just been displaced, they had been driven, and whatever drove them had been through this exact spot recently enough that the impression in the ground still held its shape. That detail pulled the hunt off the cameras and put it in the mud in front of me, and the two didn't feel like separate things after that. 30 yards further, tracks in soft mud at the edge of a seep. The impressions were deep enough to hold water, and the front edge of each one was blown out, the kind of distortion you see when something heavy hits soft ground without slowing. 3 partial impressions, too wide and short-toed for Bigfoot, too large and wrong-shaped for bear. Significant weight at speed, stride spacing long and pointing south, less than 200 yards between the bedding site and those impressions, both pointing the same direction as every camera hit for 3 weeks. Whatever made these tracks had been through that bedding site recently enough that the Bigfoot using it had left in a hurry, not before the hunters arrived, but after they got close enough that staying wasn't an option. I stood up and kept moving south. Walking the last stretch of trail, it occurred to me that every animal in this forest had probably recognized these 2 weeks before any of my cameras ever did. At that point, I was following the evidence whether I was ready for what was at the end of it or not. What came back on the next camera is where the escalation became visible in the footage itself, rather than something I was reading into the pattern. Same build, same heading, but at the far edge of the frame, just before the animal moved out of shot, it slowed. The pause only lasted a second, but the way the head lifted and settled again looked less like searching and more like confirming something it already knew. Fractionally, subtle enough that it took 3 full watches to confirm it was real. It was reading the trail, dropping pace to process scent, to calculate exactly how recently something had passed. An animal that slows mid-pursuit to read a trail is an animal close enough to its target that the target's recent passage has become live information. It wasn't slowing because it had lost the heading. It was slowing because the scent was fresh enough to tell it exactly how fresh. When it resumed, the pace was faster than what it had dropped from. That acceleration, subtle, automatic, the output of an animal that had just confirmed what it already suspected, is the moment the footage shifted from documenting a pursuit to documenting a closing. The gap between hunter and Bigfoot had narrowed to the point where patience was about to become unnecessary, and the clip showed the hunter responding to that the only way something like this responds to it, by pushing harder. The forest, when I pulled that card, was silent in the held breath way, not empty, loaded. Every bird and small mammal sitting still in whatever cover it had found, waiting for a signal that hadn't come yet. I've been in that kind of silence before, and it has a texture that an empty forest doesn't produce. Standing at that mount with a clip of something that had just confirmed its prey was close playing on the screen. I had one clear thought. Whatever made this forest hold its breath was still out there, and it wasn't far. The following card had a hit later than the established window, past 3 in the morning, which told me something before I even watched it. An animal that breaks from a consistent nightly schedule is responding to a development. The clip showed the hunter at a speed I had no prior reference for in any footage from this grid, fast enough that the frame rate produced motion blur at the edges of the shot. Moving that fast on a game trail in dense backcountry in complete darkness is not pursuit. It's the final stage of one, the stage where the calculation is complete. And the only remaining variable is distance. Something at the southern end of this grid had broken into a full run, and this was the response to it. 3 weeks of measured patient closure had reached its endpoint. What I was watching was what came after. The card after that had 2 hits on the same night, hours apart. The second one changed how I read everything above it on the timeline. 2 animals in the same frame, the slight variation in stride pattern I had noted across multiple prior cards visible side by side, confirming what I had suspected since the central cameras. There had always been 2 of them. The separation on the northern cameras wasn't 2 animals at different stages. It was 2 animals running the same hunt in coordinated separation, each working a different band of the corridor, the full shape of their method only becoming visible now that they had converged, moving together, consistent spacing, adjusting to terrain at exactly the same moment. No visible communication between them. no orientation toward each other, no pace adjustment in response to the other's movement. Just two animals operating with a synchronization so complete it produced no seams, no moments where the relationship between them was visible as a relationship rather than simply a fact. I've filmed animals moving in pairs before, and there is always some individual response visible, some moment where one adjusts and the other follows. This footage had none of that. They had been doing this together long enough that the seams had closed entirely, and the thought of how many corridors it takes to get a method that frictionless is not one I find easy to sit with. The most significant card from the central section wasn't a hunter hit. It was the Eastern Ridge camera from week 10, the last confirmed Bigfoot hit on the grid, the one I had already reviewed. But watching it again after pulling all the central section cards with the full shape of the hunt visible, across the timeline, I saw something I had missed the first time. The Bigfoot came through at just before midnight heading south. Compressed stride, faster cadence, the movement of an animal executing a decision it had already made. What I hadn't registered on the first watch was the direction of its attention. Its head was not oriented forward on the trail. It was angled back over its shoulder, looking north, toward the direction it had come from, toward whatever was behind it. It wasn't just moving away from something, it was moving away from something it was still watching, still tracking the distance between itself and what was gaining on it, even while it was running. I watched that clip 3 times after pulling the central section cards, and the third time was harder than the first, not because of what the Bigfoot was doing, because of what that backward glance meant about how close the thing behind it already was. 4 hours later, the hunter came back through heading north, same trail, same camera, moving back up through terrain it had already cleared, checking the corridor, confirming the ground it had pushed clean, holding range the way something holds range when it wants whatever it's chasing to keep running and not stop. I sat with that sequence for a long time. The Bigfoot heading south at midnight, the hunter heading north 4 hours later on the same trail. 2 animals in the same corridor, the same frame, moving in opposite directions. One running, one making sure it kept running. That is not 2 animals sharing terrain. That is a hunt in its final stage, and watching it laid out across one card made the whole 8 months of this grid collapse into a single night on a single camera. I didn't fully understand what I had been documenting until that moment. I went back into the field the following night and positioned myself at that camera location, the single point on the grid where both signatures had appeared on the same night. Night vision fully charged, not calling, not baiting, just placing myself at the convergence point with a camera running, because when footage raises a question that footage alone can't answer, being in the location is the only tool left. Behind a fallen oak on the uphill side of the game trail, clear sightline to the creek crossing below. 3 hours of baseline forest, an owl working the far ridge around midnight, a raccoon briefly at the creek near 1 in the morning. I've logged enough night hours in terrain like this to know what normal sounds like, which is the only reason I can tell you with certainty that what happened at 1:14 in the morning was not a natural lull. The owl stopped mid-call, not at the end of a sequence. Inside 1, cut off, the way sound stops when something has entered an area, and everything smaller has already processed that information and acted on it. There is a silence that means nothing is happening, and a silence that means something is happening, that you can't see yet. The forest shifted from the first to the second in under 3 seconds, and my body understood it before my brain finished catching up. The camera was up before I made a conscious decision to raise it. Movement in the canopy to the north, 80 yards out, large, fast, directional, not wind, the specific movement of something with a fixed heading traveling through the upper story with intention. It lost and reacquired the game trail twice without slowing, an animal running a route it knows from weeks of repeated use. I tracked it in the frame, and I want to be honest about what that experience was. Having this thing in frame, 60 yards of dark forest between us, knowing from 14 cameras and 40 miles of footage exactly what it had been doing in this corridor for 3 weeks. My breathing slowed without me telling it to. Something below conscious thought had already completed its assessment of the situation and was enforcing its conclusions before I had a chance to weigh in. Stay still, stay quiet. Do not give it a reason to know you're here. At 2 minutes it stopped, right at the camera mount I had been pulling cards from all week. It didn't investigate the housing, didn't react to the scent. It stood completely still and looked south, down the corridor, with the stillness of something thinking rather than pausing. Then it moved. Same pace, same heading, south. The forest sounds came back the way they return after something large has made a decision and acted on it. I stayed behind that oak until full light, not because I was unable to move, because everything I've learned across years of doing this agreed that moving was the wrong answer, and I wasn't going to argue with that. Camera 14, creek crossing at the southern terminus of the grid. 2:44 in the morning, 3 nights before I pulled the card. 48 seconds. 2 large animals enter from the north bank and cross heading south. Same build as every hit across the entire grid, wide through the shoulders, that low, heavy center of gravity, the purposeful ground-covering movement I had been tracking for 40 miles. Consistent spacing maintained through the entire crossing. They adjusted to the current at exactly the same moment, not one following the other's lead, simultaneously, as if the adjustment had been made before they entered the water. They exited on the same stride. I watched those 48 seconds 4 times at the mount, with the creek behind me, and each watch made the coordination more visible, rather than less. Water crossings are where individual decisions become apparent, where an obstacle forces each animal to respond on its own terms, and the gap between 2 animals becomes readable. These 2 didn't have a gap. They moved through the crossing the way a single animal moves through familiar terrain. No negotiation, no adjustment, no moment where the relationship between them was visible as a relationship rather than simply a fact. 40 miles and 3 weeks of footage had shown me what they were capable of individually. This clip showed me what they were as a unit, and the unit was something I had no prior reference for. Then I saw the third figure, far bank, tree line, background of the frame, completely still for the entire 48 seconds, which is why I missed it on the first watch, because a stationary shape in a dense tree line at that hour disappears completely if your attention is on 2 animals crossing in the foreground. But it's there, taller than the 2 crossing animals, longer limbed, more upright. The proportions I had spent 10 weeks documenting on the eastern ridge before the grid went silent, standing in the tree line on the far bank, watching the 2 hunters cross the creek below it, not moving toward the water, not retreating into the forest. 48 seconds of complete physical stillness while the animals that had driven it the full length of this corridor crossed 30 feet below. Not a shift in weight, not a turn of the head. The kind of stillness that takes active, sustained effort to maintain, the kind that has been practiced, that was learned through the specific understanding that any movement at all would be a mistake. And in the final 2 seconds of the clip, it takes 1 step backward, slow and controlled, the movement of something that has learned through direct experience exactly how much motion is too much. And the tree line closes around it. I pulled up the week 4 card then, a daytime clip I had reviewed for 15 seconds 8 months earlier, logged as inconclusive and filed. A shape in the background on the far bank of a creek crossing in the northern section, something I had read as shadow and moved on from without a second thought. Watching it directly alongside the camera 14 footage, what happened to the timeline I had spent 8 months building took under a minute to complete. That shape is there in week 4, 6 weeks before the first hunter appeared on the eastern cameras, 6 weeks before the Bigfoot activity stopped, 6 weeks before any of it. Watching both clips side by side makes the answer to what that shape is significantly less ambiguous than it was when I filed it. Same stillness, same bank position, same complete absence of movement. It had been in this corridor before the hunters arrived. It had watched them enter from the north. It had spent 8 months and 40 miles learning the one thing the camera 14 footage shows it had learned completely. The 2 creek crossings aren't the same location, but they sit on the same waterway, the same drainage running the full length of the corridor from north to south. That Bigfoot was at the top of the drainage in week 4. At the bottom of it 8 months later. It had followed the hunters the entire length of this corridor, close enough to watch and far enough back to survive. Pulling from 40 miles of observation, the single rule that the final 2 seconds of the last clip showed, it had learned completely. 1 step back, slow, controlled, into the tree line. When they cross, you don't move, you don't make a sound. You let them pass and you wait, because you have already watched what this corridor looks like after they come through it. and you know that the only thing standing between you and the same outcome as every other Bigfoot in 40 miles is the discipline to stand completely still and let them go. Monsters hunting Bigfoots across the Appalachian Trail, and one Bigfoot left alive that learned the only rule that kept it that way. Most Bigfoot sightings show a creature that's harmless, but one set of trail cam footage proves just how deadly he really is. Deep in the forest, my group of backpackers set up camp, completely unaware that in just moments we would be dragged screaming across the forest floor. My name is Mark, and I positioned the first trail camera on a thick Douglas fir approximately 40 yards from our planned campsite. The motion-activated lens faced the clearing where we intended to pitch our tents. I secured the weatherproof case, tested the infrared sensor, verified the SD card had 64 gigabytes of empty space, then moved deeper into the Pacific Northwest forest to mount the second camera. Something large moved at the edge of the clearing, a shadow too tall and fast to be a deer, vanishing behind the firs before I could track it. I felt a prickle along my neck, the forest suddenly quieter. Wildlife documentation had consumed my weekends for 3 years. I wanted footage of Roosevelt elk, possibly a black bear foraging near the creek. The cameras would capture everything within a 120-foot radius. As I adjusted the camera angle, a twig snapped somewhere just beyond sight. I froze. The sound didn't echo like a deer stepping. It was heavier, deliberate. Was this still a routine documentation trip, or had my pursuit of rare footage put us directly in something's path? The second camera went on a rotting cedar stump near the water trail, angled to cover the narrow footpath leading to the stream. Wet pine and decomposing vegetation filled my nostrils. October fog clung to the Cascade Range undergrowth like cotton gauze. I thought I saw movement in the fog, a hulking shape slipping between the trees, but when I turned, the mist swallowed it. Every few minutes, there was a faint, guttural exhale from deep in the forest, just low enough not to carry. The third camera I mounted 8 feet high on a hemlock overlooking the fire pit area, complete coverage of our campsite. My 3 companions thought my obsession with documentation was excessive, but nobody objected when I spent 20 minutes adjusting angles and testing motion triggers. All the while, a shadow seemed to mirror my movements along the tree line, just beyond clear view, keeping pace but staying hidden. Darrow unpacked his gear first. He stood 6'3" athletic build, always moving with restless energy. He dropped his 70-liter backpack near the stone fire ring and stretched his shoulders. Lennox worked methodically, laying out her equipment on a blue tarp with military precision. Dark hair in a tight braid, efficient movements, no wasted effort. Orrin gathered kindling in silence, shorter than Darrow by 5 inches, methodical and quiet. He stacked dried twigs in a pyramidal structure and brushed Douglas fir bark from his palms. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching every placement of their hands, the way the fog swirled unnaturally around the forest floor, as if disturbed by something massive moving just out of sight. I reviewed the initial trail cam footage on my smartphone. The cameras synced to a wireless app that displayed recordings in near real time within a quarter-mile range. The first clips showed our approach. Darrow leading, Lennox second, Orrin third, myself bringing up the rear. We looked relaxed and the footage was crisp. 4 friends entering wilderness for 72 hours. But the next clip felt wrong. The camera had triggered movement at the clearing's eastern edge. The frame showed Darrow in the background unpacking his sleeping bag. In the lower left quadrant, partially obscured by sword ferns, a shadow moved too quickly. Motion blur rendered it unidentifiable, but the proportions disturbed me. Too large for a deer, too low to the ground for a standing human. The shape moved with fluid speed, then vanished behind a cluster of hemlocks in under 2 seconds. I replayed it 4 times. My stomach knotted. Probably an elk. The Olympic Peninsula had massive Roosevelt elk. I pocketed my phone and tried to ignore the unease crawling up my spine. Was denial easier than accepting what the footage was implying? Sunlight disappeared behind the western ridgeline at 6:13 p.m. Shadows stretched across our camp like grasping fingers. We prepared freeze-dried meals over crackling flames while darkness pressed against our small bubble of firelight. Beyond that 10-foot radius of warmth, the forest became an impenetrable wall of black. Wind moved through branches overhead. The creek burbled 200 yards north. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness. But other sounds emerged, a branch snapping to the east, leaves rustling when the wind had stopped. I stared into the tree line, but nothing was visible, just absolute darkness pressing against the fire's glow. I checked the trail cam app again. 2 new clips. One showed Orrin walking to his tent, the other captured swaying branches. Nothing else. I scrolled back to the clip with the shadow. I zoomed the grainy footage as far as the app allowed. The shape had a vaguely humanoid outline, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, arms that hung too low, shoulders too wide for normal human proportions. The image pixelated when I zoomed further. If the camera had limits, what details was it failing to show? Darrow told a story about a disastrous kayaking trip as Lennox added firewood. Orrin poked embers with a long stick. I forced myself to participate in camp activities, but my attention kept drifting to the darkness beyond our firelight. Something felt fundamentally wrong about this forest. At 10:15 p.m., we retreated to individual tents. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to sounds I normally found peaceful. But tonight, every crack, every rustle, every distant animal call felt hostile. Then I heard footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and circled our campsite in a wide arc. I unzipped my tent 4 inches and peered through the gap. The fire had reduced to glowing coals. The other 3 tents showed no movement. I saw nothing in the darkness, and the footsteps stopped abruptly. If it wasn't trying to be seen, what was it waiting for? I opened the trail cam app with trembling fingers. The cameras had triggered 11 times in the past 90 minutes. I opened the first clip, which the creek trail camera had captured movement from. A massive shape moved through the frame from right to left, partially obscured by tree trunks, but visible enough to make my breath catch. It moved on 2 legs. The gait was smooth, almost floating. The figure stood at least 7.5 feet tall, broad beyond any human proportions, covered in dark fur that absorbed the infrared light. The creature paused for perhaps half a second. The camera caught a profile that made my blood freeze. A sloped forehead, heavy brow ridge, flat nose, and a massive jaw. Then it glided deeper into the forest without snapping a single branch. This was Bigfoot. I replayed the clip. The silence of its movement was impossible. Something that large should crash through underbrush, break branches, and create noise. The next clip terrified me more. The fire pit camera had triggered. The frame showed dying embers and 3 dark tents. In the background, barely visible behind a thick cedar trunk, a silhouette stood watching. 8 feet tall, completely motionless, and watching our camp. It was watching us sleep. How long had it been standing there before the camera noticed? I wanted to wake the others. I wanted to pack everything and run. But I remained frozen in my sleeping bag, clutching my flashlight, telling myself it was a bear. Bears stood on hind legs. The footage was grainy, with low light distorting proportions. I was seeing things that weren't there. Sleep never came as I listened to every sound with hypervigilant intensity until gray dawn light filtered through my tent fabric. I heard Darrow unzip his tent. I crawled from my sleeping bag and joined him at the cold fire pit. Morning fog reduced visibility to maybe 25 feet. The air temperature hovered around 42 degrees. Darrow rekindled the fire using dry bark and small branches. I didn't mention the trail cam footage. I told myself I needed more evidence before causing panic. Lennox emerged, looking well rested. Orrin woke last, stretching outside his tent with mechanical movements. Darrow announced his intention to check the creek for trout. Orrin volunteered to accompany him, and Lennox decided to join them. I declined, claiming I needed to check camera functionality. Was I protecting them from panic or abandoning them to something worse? They packed light day packs. Darrow grabbed his collapsible fishing rod. Orrin filled 2 water bottles. Lennox pulled on a gray fleece jacket. They headed north toward the creek trail, their forms swallowed by dense fog within seconds. I checked the trail cam app with shaking hands. The cameras had triggered 9 more times overnight. Most clips showed nothing, but one clip made my heart nearly stop. The creek trail camera had captured something crouched behind a massive fallen log. Bigfoot was waiting, watching the path. The Sasquatch was enormous, even in its crouched position. Dark brown fur, almost black in the infrared footage. Arms impossibly long, resting on the log with hands that showed thick fingers tipped with curved claws. The face was partially visible, deep-set eyes that reflected the camera's infrared like an animal's. Flat nose, mouth slightly open, revealing large teeth. Then a scream shattered the morning silence. It came from the creek, high-pitched and terrified, abruptly cut off. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. My boots hammered against the dirt trail as branches whipped my face and arms. Fog made navigation nearly impossible. I shouted Darrow's name and got no response. I called for Orrin and Lennox, but only silence answered. I reached the creek at a full sprint. The water ran shallow, maybe 18 inches deep, flowing over smooth river stones. Darrow's fishing rod lay on the muddy bank. The line tangled in cattails. His backpack floated half-submerged 3 feet from shore. But Darrow was gone. How does a man vanish without a struggle, unless the struggle was hopeless? Branches snapped violently to my left, deep in the forest. I turned and saw movement through the fog, a massive shape dragging something heavy through dense underbrush. I ran toward it without thinking. My lungs burned and thorns tore at my clothing. I crashed through a wall of ferns and stumbled into a small clearing. The trail camera near the creek had captured everything. The footage showed Darrow being dragged by his left ankle. His arms flailed uselessly. His legs kicked at nothing. The creature had him in one massive hand, pulling him over jagged rocks and through muddy ground like he weighed nothing. Darrow's face pointed directly at the camera. His mouth opened in a silent scream, eyes wide with absolute terror. His backpack snagged on a low-hanging branch and tore completely free. The creature didn't slow. It yanked Darrow forward with such force that his body lifted off the ground momentarily before slamming against a tree trunk. His arms went limp. The creature paused. It crouched low, breathing heavily through its nose. I could see its back in the footage, impossibly broad, covered in matted dark fur, muscles rippling like steel cables beneath the surface. It turned its head slightly. The camera caught a 3/4 profile. The face was almost human but grotesquely exaggerated. Heavy brow ridge, massive protruding jaw, small dark eyes filled with predatory intelligence. Had my pursuit of proof finally put a face to the legend? And was that face now aware it was being recorded? It resumed dragging Darrow. His unconscious body carved a trench through soft mud and wet leaves. His shirt rode up to his armpits, exposing his bare back. The creature pulled him into a dense thicket of blackberry bushes. Thorns ripped at Darrow's exposed skin. Blood smeared across leaves and branches. The creature showed no concern for the thorns shredding its hands. It simply dragged its prey deeper into the forest with methodical determination. The camera lost visual contact. The clip ended. I stood paralyzed. My mind rejected what my eyes had witnessed. My legs refused commands to move. A low growl rumbled behind me. I turned with agonizing slowness. Bigfoot stood 23 feet away. It was larger than the footage suggested. Easily 8 feet tall, perhaps taller. Shoulders broad enough to span 4 feet. Arms that hung past its knees, ending in hands the size of baseball gloves. The face was a nightmare combination of human and something primordial. The eyes locked onto mine with unmistakable intelligence. It took one deliberate step forward. Did it recognize me as the one who'd been watching it all along? I ran. Pure instinct overrode rational thought. My boots slipped on wet leaves and moss-covered rocks. I crashed through low branches. Thorns shredded my jacket. I heard the creature behind me, heavy footfalls that shook the ground, branches snapping like gunshots, a guttural breathing that sounded almost like words. I didn't look back, and I ran until my lungs felt like they were tearing apart. I ran until I tasted blood in my mouth. Then the sound stopped. I collapsed against a tree, gasping, shaking violently. I had no idea where I was, as the fog obscured everything beyond 10 feet. I pulled out my smartphone, but there was no signal. I opened the trail cam app. The creek camera had captured my escape. The footage showed me sprinting through the frame in absolute panic. Behind me, barely visible through fog, Bigfoot stood completely still, watching, not chasing. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, dragging Darrow's limp body behind it, like a child dragging a stuffed toy. I vomited against the tree. When I could move again, I used the sun's position to navigate. It took 37 minutes to find camp. When I crashed into the clearing, Lennox and Orrin sat by the rebuilt fire. Lennox's expression changed instantly when she saw my face. I showed them the footage without speaking. We watched Darrow being dragged into the forest. Lennox's face drained of color. Orrin's hands clenched until his knuckles went white. Once they saw the proof, could any of us still pretend this was just a missing person? Lennox started packing her gear immediately. Her movements were frantic, uncoordinated. She kept repeating that we needed to leave right now, immediately. Orrin grabbed his backpack and stated he was going to search for Darrow. I grabbed his arm and told him Darrow was gone. We couldn't help him. That thing was still out there. Orrin pulled free from my grip. He said he wasn't abandoning Darrow. He walked toward the creek trail with determined strides. Lennox screamed after him, but he didn't stop. He didn't even look back. The fog swallowed him within seconds. Lennox looked at me with eyes filled with tears and terror. We waited by the fire for 43 minutes. Lennox paced in tight circles, checking her watch every few seconds. I monitored the trail cam app obsessively. The cameras had triggered twice since Orrin left. Both clips showed empty forest. No sign of Orrin, no sign of the Sasquatch. If the cameras saw nothing, was that because Orrin was safe, or because he was already gone? Then the app updated with a new clip. I opened it with trembling fingers. The creek trail camera had captured Orrin walking north with his backpack. He moved cautiously, head swiveling side to side, clearly searching for Darrow. The clip showed him for 6 seconds before he walked out of frame. The footage ended. I waited for another update, but none came. Lennox stopped pacing and stared at me. I told her we needed to stay at camp. If Orrin returned, he'd come here. If we left, we might miss him. The words sounded hollow even as I spoke them. The truth was, I was too terrified to move. Bigfoot was out there in the fog, hunting. We rebuilt the fire until flames reached 3 feet high. We pulled our remaining gear into a tight circle around the fire pit. We sat with our backs to each other, watching the tree line in all directions. The fog began lifting around, but visibility still didn't exceed 60 feet. If it had watched us before, was it watching us now from farther away? The trail cam app updated. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The camera mounted on the hemlock overlooking our fire pit had triggered, but we were both sitting right here. We hadn't moved. I opened the clip. The footage showed our campsite from above. Lennox and I sat by the fire, our backs together, exactly as we were now. But at the edge of the frame, barely visible behind a massive cedar trunk 70 feet from camp, a silhouette stood watching. Bigfoot had circled back, and it was observing us, studying us. I showed Lennox the footage. Her breathing accelerated into hyperventilation. I told her to slow down and that we needed to stay calm, but my own hands wouldn't stop shaking. The app updated again with a different camera, the one near the creek trail. I opened it with a sense of dread that made my stomach clench. Orrin was in the frame, but he wasn't walking anymore. He was on the ground, being dragged backward by both ankles. Bigfoot had him in a two-handed grip, pulling him over a section of creek bank covered in jagged rocks. Had my proof just turned into a death certificate? The Sasquatch dragged him over a boulder the size of a footstool. Orrin's spine bent backward at an impossible angle as his body folded over the rock. His hands released the ground. His arms went limp. Bigfoot kept dragging without pausing. It pulled Orrin through a shallow section of the creek. Bigfoot emerged on the far bank and continued dragging Orrin into dense underbrush. Salal bushes and Oregon grape closed around them. The last frame showed Orrin's boot disappearing into the vegetation. I couldn't speak. Lennox took my phone and watched the clip 3 times. When she finished, she made a sound like a wounded animal. She stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped the ground and immediately began grabbing gear, shoving items into her backpack without order or care. I told her we needed a plan, that we couldn't just bolt into the woods. Whatever that thing was, it was fast, stronger than anything I'd ever seen, and far more intelligent than a normal animal. Running without direction would only get us killed. She ignored me. Slinging the half-packed backpack over her shoulder, she started walking south, away from the creek, back toward where we'd entered the forest. I called after her. She walked faster. I grabbed my own gear and followed. Were we fleeing danger or running straight into the blind spot of the cameras? We moved through the trees in terrified silence. Every snapping twig stopped us cold, and every bird call made us flinch. The fog had mostly burned off, but beneath the dense canopy, the forest stayed dark. We could see maybe 90 feet ahead now, nowhere near far enough. We'd traveled about half a mile when Lennox announced she needed to pee. She stepped behind a massive Douglas fir, 20 feet off the trail. I waited, scanning the forest in every direction. A branch snapped behind me. I spun, but all I saw were endless trees and tangled underbrush. Another snap came from my left, and I whirled again, but nothing. The sounds weren't random. They moved around me, deliberate, calculated. I called Lennox's name, but received no answer. I walked toward the Douglas fir, but she wasn't there. Her backpack lay on the ground, its contents spilled. A water bottle, energy bars, a rolled-up jacket. Lennox was gone. How does someone disappear without even time to scream? Then a muffled scream cut through the forest, coming from deeper in, maybe 200 feet away. I ran toward it. My boots pounded the forest floor. I leapt over fallen logs and crashed through ferns. The scream came again, closer now, but abruptly stopped. I burst into a small clearing and froze. I saw fresh drag marks. The underbrush flattened in a clear path leading downhill, and I sprinted after it. The trail cam footage from the fire pit camera captured the attack, though the angle was poor and the range extreme. At the edge of the frame, barely visible, Lennox ran from behind the tree. She didn't make it 3 steps. A massive arm shot from behind a hemlock and yanked her by the hair. Her feet lifted off the ground. She slammed face first into the trunk. The impact registered even through the distant footage. She collapsed. Bigfoot grabbed her ankle and began dragging her. The camera caught only glimpses, a flash of her red jacket, the Sasquatch's broad back, long arms pulling. Her body bounced over roots and rocks. One boot flew off, landing in a patch of ferns, while her free leg kicked weakly. I followed the drag marks downhill. They led toward a shallow ravine approximately 20 feet deep. The ground became loose dirt and scattered shale. I scrambled down the slope, sliding, grabbing at exposed roots to slow my descent. Was I still trying to save her? Or just chasing the truth too late? At the bottom of the ravine, I found Lennox's other boot. It was covered in blood. The drag marks continued along the ravine floor, following a narrow stream bed that was currently dry. I ran along the stream bed, jumping over scattered rocks. The marks led around a bend. What I saw next has replayed in my nightmares every night since. Lennox was being dragged by her wrists now. Bigfoot held both her arms in one massive hand, like a parent dragging a resistant toddler. But the dragging was methodical and purposeful. The Sasquatch would pull Lennox forward 10 feet, then deliberately swing her body sideways into a tree trunk. The impact made a wet thudding sound. Then it would continue dragging. Pull 10 feet, then swing into another tree. The sound of flesh and bone hitting wood echoed through the ravine. I screamed. The word came out primal and incoherent. Bigfoot's head snapped toward me, those intelligent eyes locked onto mine. It released Lennox's wrists. Her body crumpled to the ground like a discarded coat. The creature turned to face me fully. Had my presence finally shifted me from an observer to the next subject of its attention? It took one step forward, then another, moving slowly and deliberately, like it was savoring my fear. I scrambled backward. My boots slipped on loose shale, and I went down hard on my back. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs. Bigfoot covered the distance between us in 3 massive strides. It reached down. I rolled left. Bigfoot's hand slammed into the ground where my chest had been a second earlier. Dirt and rocks exploded outward from the impact. I got to my feet and ran back the way I'd come. My lungs screamed and my legs felt like they were moving through mud. Bigfoot's footsteps thundered behind me. I reached the ravine wall and started climbing. My hands grabbed at roots and rocks. My boots scrabbled for purchase on the loose dirt. I climbed with pure adrenaline-fueled desperation. Bigfoot's breathing sounded directly below me. I didn't look down, I just climbed. My hand caught a thick root and I hauled myself up, scrambling the last few feet without thinking. I threw myself over the edge, hit the ground hard, rolled, and forced myself back to my feet. I kept running. I didn't look back. I ran until the forest blurred and my vision darkened at the edges, until my legs gave out and I slammed into a tree, retching bile onto the leaves. How far can terror carry someone before their body simply gives up? When I could breathe again, I checked my phone. The trail cam app showed a new clip. One of the cameras had somehow captured part of my escape. Am I going in circles? The footage showed me scrambling up the ravine wall. Below me, Bigfoot stood at the base, watching. It made no attempt to follow. It simply watched me climb. When I disappeared over the edge, it turned and walked back toward where Lennox's body lay. The clip ended. I checked the other cameras. The Creek Trail camera had triggered, showing the Sasquatch dragging Lennox by one ankle. Her body was limp. Her face bounced along the ground, leaving a smear of blood on rocks and dirt. Bigfoot dragged her past the camera and deeper into the forest. The direction was north, away from our campsite, away from any trail or path, into the deepest, darkest part of the forest. I was alone. Darrow was gone, Orrin was gone, Lennox was gone. I sat with my back against the tree and opened the trail cam app, forcing myself to watch clip after clip. Bigfoot appeared in 17 different recordings from the past 18 hours. It had been there since we arrived, watching, waiting, planning. I forced myself to think. Panic wouldn't save me. I needed a strategy. The creature dragged its victims. That was the pattern. It didn't kill immediately. It took them deeper into the forest to some unknown place. If it caught me, I might have seconds before it dragged me. Could pattern recognition save me where disbelief had doomed the others? It had grabbed Darrow's backpack and Orrin's too. If it grabbed mine, maybe I could slip out of it, leave the pack behind, and run. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. I loosened the shoulder straps and adjusted the hip belt so it would release with one quick motion. I made sure I could shrug out of it without thinking. The forest darkened as the canopy thickened overhead. Ancient Douglas firs towered above me, their trunks wider than cars, blotting out what little light remained. The undergrowth closed in, ferns, Oregon grape, devil's club, forcing every step to be deliberate. One misstep would mean death. Then I heard it. A branch snapped behind me, maybe 300 feet back. It was coming. I started running again, legs burning, lungs screaming. I vaulted a fallen log and nearly went down on loose rock, windmilling my arms before catching myself and pushing on. How long before exhaustion made me as easy to take as the others? Behind me, something massive crossed the clearing. Then silence. When I could hear it, I knew where it was. Silence meant it could be anywhere. Behind me, ahead of me, circling. Every shadow became a threat. Every tree trunk could hide 8 feet of muscle and intelligence. The ground began to slope downward, steep and unstable, loose dirt and shale sliding underfoot. A ravine like the one that had nearly killed me earlier. I could try to circle around, but that meant more time, more distance, so I went down. My boots slid immediately. I grabbed exposed roots to control my descent as dirt and rock cascaded around me. Small stones bounced downhill ahead of me like warning shots. I made it 20 feet before my left foot hit moss-covered rock. It shot out from under me, and I went down hard. Sliding, I splashed through shallow water, leapt between boulders, my ankles screaming with every step. Behind me, Bigfoot hit the stream bed, its footfalls thunderous against stone. I could hear it breathing, deep and steady, not even strained. What kind of creature doesn't even tire during a chase like this? The stream curved right. I followed it, forcing my legs to keep moving. Ahead, the trees thinned and light spilled in where the stream widened. I ran for it on pure instinct. Something grabbed my backpack. A massive hand closed around the top strap and yanked. My body snapped backward. My feet left the ground. For a split second, I was weightless, swinging, just like Lennox, just like the others. I wrenched one arm free, then the other. The backpack tore away, and I dropped. I hit the ground hard and rolled as Bigfoot slammed the empty pack into the tree with devastating force. It exploded. Gear flew everywhere. I splashed across the stream and clawed up the opposite bank, my ankle nearly giving out beneath me. I grabbed ferns and roots, hauled myself up, and crested the embankment. And then I saw it. A chain-link fence, 8 feet tall, topped with barbed wire. Beyond it, through the gaps, a service road. Behind me, Bigfoot roared, not the low sound from before, but something raw and furious. I hit the fence and climbed, hands and boots finding the metal automatically. Pain tore through my palms as metal ripped flesh. I didn't let go. I hauled myself up and over as the barbs shredded my jacket and raked my back. I dropped down the other side and hit pavement hard. I stood, bleeding and gasping, and turned. Bigfoot remained on the far side of the fence, staring at me. It didn't climb. It didn't charge. After a moment, it vanished into the trees like smoke. I stood there for 10 seconds, breathing, bleeding, unable to comprehend that I was still alive. I'm Caleb Harlan, and my back is pressed hard against the trunk of a Douglas fir, legs on fire, lungs trying to remember what a normal breathing rhythm feels like. The canopy above me is so thick it swallows midday whole and spits it out as something closer to late dusk. Everything down here tinted in a deep, layered green-black, like the light itself has been strained through a dozen overlapping membranes of shadow before it reaches the forest floor. I have been running. I can't tell you exactly how long. Long enough that my thighs are burning and my chest feels like it's being wrung out by hand. Long enough that the muscles in my calves have progressed from burning to a deeper, duller protest that I know from experience means the reserves are nearly gone. I am being observed by something that is close. I look down at the forest floor almost involuntarily, half expecting to catch movement at ground level. Some animal, something recognizable, something that fits into a category I have names for. I am still looking down when the world directly above me comes completely apart. The scream arrives before anything else does. Sudden, explosive, zero windup, detonating right overhead with no warning at all, like someone took the upper register of a woman's scream and ran it through a distortion pedal until the signal tore itself into metallic shreds. It lasts half a second, maybe less. In that half second, I have not looked up, have not processed what I'm hearing, am still somewhere between flinching and freezing, still stuck in the gap between stimulus and response. And then Bigfoot drops. I don't mean it jumped down, I mean it fell. Intentionally, purposefully, limbs drawn in tight against its body, torso angled like something that has done this before and knows exactly how to bring the weight down. Straight out of the canopy and straight toward the exact patch of ground where I had been sitting not half a second before. Bigfoot hits with an impact I feel in my back teeth. Dirt erupts. Pine needles blast outward in a ring 3 feet wide. Its hands, and I say hands, but what I mean are weapons, broad and thick-fingered with nails that are closer to claws than anything else, rake deep parallel grooves into the soil on landing, 4 inches deep at least, and those grooves stop maybe 3 inches from the front of my left boot. 3 inches? I am already scrambling backward on my hands and the heels of my feet before my brain has issued a single coherent instruction. I'm just moving, backward and sideways, across uneven root-laced ground, not looking where I'm going, not caring. The Sasquatch in front of me is 500 pounds at minimum. My brain is doing this assessment in real time with the dispassionate accuracy of pure adrenaline. And it is covered in dense, dark brown-black fur, matted with bark debris and fir needles. And its face is broad and brutally flat, and its eyes have found me with a focus that contains absolutely no ambiguity. Can I put enough distance between us before it decides I'm the target? Bigfoot does not pause, does not square up, does not vocalize again, does not perform any of the threat display behavior that gets discussed in the second-hand accounts. It simply moves, and the movement is already carrying a weapon. Something is in its right hand, a broken tree limb, maybe 4 feet long, cross-section as thick as my forearm. And I genuinely cannot tell you whether it grabbed that limb off the ground on landing or had it coming down from the canopy. The timeline doesn't allow for either, but both seem to have happened. Bigfoot raises the limb overhead with both hands, full extension above its head, and brings it straight down at my skull. This is not a warning. There is no arc to the swing, no feint, no hesitation in the mechanics, just a direct vertical overhead strike aimed with unambiguous intention to end the situation with one hit. I see the full body mechanics of it in a compressed fragment of a second. The hips rotating, the shoulders driving down, the entire mass behind the motion. I throw myself sideways, and the club hits the earth where my head was with a crack that I feel as much as here. It splits the soil. It snaps off smaller embedded branches underneath it, like dry sticks. My shoulder hits a root cluster, and something grinds in a way that I file away to worry about later, and I'm already pulling my legs under me, already scanning, already looking for anything I can use. Is there even a place left to hide, or have I run out of options? That's when I see the gap. 2 fallen logs, old ones, half rotted and gray, crossed at a low angle to my left, maybe 8 feet away. Between them, there's a crevice, barely wider than my shoulders, maybe 16 inches at the widest point, less than that where the bark is still on. I do not weigh my options. I do not have time to weigh my options. I move. I hit that gap at speed, and I drive myself into it headfirst, scraping both sides of my ribcage simultaneously, feeling fabric shred and then skin shred underneath it. And I wedge in deep enough that my chest is genuinely compressed between the logs, and I have to take short, deliberate half-breaths instead of full ones. My face ends up maybe 6 inches from the outer edge of the opening. My boots are behind me, heels probably visible from outside. I press in as deep as the space allows, and I go completely still. Will this cramped refuge hold, or is it just a trap waiting to snap? Bigfoot reaches me in seconds. It does not slow down or hesitate or try to understand what I've done. It lunges directly at the gap, both arms driving in at full extension, and those arms are enormous, not proportional to any primate I have a reference point for, built like load-bearing structural columns, and they wedge hard at the shoulders before they can reach me. I can hear the logs groan under the lateral pressure. Bigfoot's fingers are inside the gap anyway, all of them searching, and they are clawing through the air maybe 4 or 5 inches from my face. The nails leave visible tracks across the rotted wood and packed soil. I pull my head back as far as the confined space allows, straining my neck, trying to find 1 more inch of clearance that isn't there. I do not make a sound. There is a pause. Not retreat, not withdrawal, just recalculation. And then the tactics shift, and the assault on the logs themselves begins. Bigfoot stops trying to reach through the gap and starts trying to remove the barrier. It bites into the upper log, and I want to be precise about what I mean when I say that not gnawing, not exploratory contact, but a full deliberate bite applied with the intent to remove material. Wood fibers snap, chunks of rotted log come away. I can hear the specific sound of it, fibrous and wet, the way compromised wood sounds when it fails under direct force. Between bites, it uses the club, hammering down on top of the log structure with both hands, and each impact travels through the logs and into my back and spine like a shockwave, and each impact sends debris down into the crevice. Splinters, bark fragments, loose soil, all of it falling into my face and eyes, and I cannot move enough to clear any of it. My left eye is partially crusted. The smell inside the crevice is overwhelming. Rot and wet soil and sap and something else, something animal and hot and immediate that doesn't fit any category I have, but that every part of my body is reading as a threat signal. The logs are not collapsing, not yet, but material is being removed with every pass, and the timeline on that math is not favorable. Then the second scream comes in from somewhere to my left, and everything changes. Is it help or just more chaos about to land on me? Different pitch, slightly higher, slightly more fractured at the peak, but carrying the same absolute violence, the same total lack of preamble. A second Bigfoot hits the ground, maybe 25 feet from my position, not from as high as the first one dropped, but fast and low, and moving before it has fully landed. It doesn't waste a single beat before covering the distance toward the first one, and the first Bigfoot, mid-swing on the logs, mid-assault on my position, spins on it with an immediacy that tells me exactly how much thought went into abandoning the attack on me. 0. The calculation took no time because there was no calculation. Are they turning on each other before I even get a chance to escape? The two Bigfoot collide a second later. Not gradually, not with a closing approach, just full mass impact at speed, two enormous bodies trying to occupy the same point in space. The sound is percussive and deep, and I feel the ground move through the logs and through my compressed ribcage. There is no circling, there is no posturing or display. The fight opens at full intensity in the first second and does not step down from there. I am wedged inside a rotting log in the dark, splinters embedding themselves in both eyes and cutting small lines of blood across my eyelids, watching two Bigfoot tear into each other not 30 feet from my face. I can hear their breathing, deep, guttural, ragged bursts, smell the musky heat of their fur, the earthy tang of upturned soil and snapped wood. Every movement sends vibrations through the log I am wedged in, but I do not shift, do not adjust more than necessary to maintain position. My chest tightens instinctively, and I do not breathe through my mouth for fear of even the faintest sound. I do not move anything. I do not absolutely have to move. Every nerve is taut. Every muscle is ready. I am trying, almost superstitiously, to become part of the log, to merge with the wood, the rot, the earth around me, to occupy no space of my own, to vanish from the awareness of the creatures tearing the forest apart mere yards away. The fight does not pause. The two Bigfoot crash into a fallen sapling and send it snapping like a dry whip. One shoves the other backward into a cluster of ferns and moss, sending debris flying in all directions. Their arms lash outward, catching on each other's torsos, slamming into tree trunks and rolling over exposed roots. Every hit sends a jolt through the ground, through the logs, through me. Their massive bodies crush small shrubs underfoot, scatter loose rock, and churn the forest floor into dark, uneven furrows. I track every movement through narrow gaps in the rotting log, catching glimpses of fur, arms, shoulders, faces contorted in violent exertion, teeth bared, claws extended. I am pinned, yet hyper-aware. Every second stretches long enough to feel the air vibrate from each impact. If one of them shifts attention even slightly, if their gaze flickers toward me, I know in an instant that my survival depends on absolute stillness. The chaos escalates further. One Bigfoot swings both arms in a coordinated shove, almost imperceptibly timed, and the other braces, legs wide, muscles coiled. Momentum carries both forward, colliding with a nearby trunk, bark shearing under the weight of massive bodies. Branches splinter above me, needles rain down, and the log I occupy vibrates with the shock. I am pressed tighter into the decay, heart hammering, every sense screaming the same urgent warning. Do not move, do not breathe, do not exist in a way they can detect. The fight's volume, its physical presence, fills every inch of the forest within 20 feet. The air dense with the scent of disturbed earth, the metallic tang of dirt and bark, the animal musk of exertion. And yet I remain utterly still, an extension of the rotting wood, invisible by sheer force of stillness and terror. And then the third Sasquatch arrives before I have time to process the second one. Is this the end, or does the chaos work in my favor? I hear it first, a crash through lower canopy 20 feet up. The sound of something massive simply displacing material rather than navigating around it. Branches giving way under weight and force. And then it hits the ground with an impact that reorganizes the local topography in a way that is not metaphorical. I can see it through the gaps between the logs, larger than the other two, or at least that's how it registers in the chaos. And louder, and moving with a weight that makes the previous two look like a preamble. Now all three of them are in the same 30-foot radius, and the energy in that space shifts into something that has no accurate name. They vocalize at each other, Not sustained roars, nothing theatrical, but short detonating screams and guttural burst sounds, fast and overlapping. And they do this while pressing into each other's space aggressively, bodies almost touching, volume escalating. And this argument, this exchange, this whatever it is, lasts maybe 4 seconds before the whole thing pivots into the most violent, sustained physical encounter I have ever been present for in my life. Can I stay hidden while the epicenter of destruction unfolds so close? One Bigfoot grabs another by both shoulders, full grip, fingers visibly sinking into fur and flesh, and drives it backward into a tree trunk. The tree is probably 20 inches across, and it shudders on impact. I hear the wood stress. Branches shake loose from 30 or 40 feet up and fall through the canopy. Bigfoot that got driven into the trunk bounces off and delivers a full-arm lateral blow immediately. No recovery time, aimed at the ribs and connecting with the sound that carries. The third. Bigfoot enters the exchange from the side with a broken limb it's using as a weapon, sweeping it across the back of the nearest one, and then the biting starts. Constant, purposeful, targeted biting, not panic, not defensive, aimed at shoulders, the back of the neck, the upper arms, anywhere a grip can be established and a hold can be built or material can be pulled away. Dark blood begins to appear in the fur, and not in small amounts. It soaks in and mats the fur and catches what little light reaches the forest floor and looks nearly black. The smell of it reaches me inside the crevice. It is copper and iron, and something rawer underneath that. One Bigfoot gets partially lifted, not fully off the ground, but a hip and shoulder maneuver gets its feet clear for a moment, and it gets thrown laterally. It lands on its side, and the impact churns the forest floor, exposes root systems that have been underground for decades, sends a spray of dark soil and shattered ground. Cover in a wide radius. It is upright before I have finished registering that it went down. The area between the three of them is being systematically destroyed. Soil churned into loose, dark earth, roots exposed and snapped, bark stripped from 3 or 4 nearby trunks where bodies have been pressed or thrown, fir needles scattered across a 20-foot radius until the ground underneath is bare. One Bigfoot gets the second one down to a knee and goes for the throat with both hands, fingers clamping, and holds it for maybe 2 seconds before the third drags it backward by the fur of its shoulders and the grip breaks. The sequence resets. They start again. The intensity does not decrease between iterations. It climbs. How much destruction can the forest endure before the chaos reaches me? I am watching all of this through gaps in the logs. The gaps are inches from my face. I am not moving. I am not making a sound. I am absolutely and completely aware that if any one of the 3 of them shifts their attention toward my position even briefly, everything changes immediately and in ways I don't survive. One of Bigfoot takes a simultaneous 2-handed shove from both of the others and goes backward, directly into my log cover. The impact is a different category of event. The entire structure torques violently. One of the main logs, the upper one, the one that has been taking the club strikes, cracks along a fault line it probably developed years ago and has been waiting for an excuse to use. The crevice widens. Light cuts in from the left side where the crack is opened. Actual exterior light, gray, green, and cold. And the tight compression that has been holding me in place disappears. My rib cage has room. My left arm has movement. Splinters rain down into my face from the split log. Another log shifts under me, and the whole geometry of the shelter changes in under a second. The gap that I squeezed into is now visible from outside, from ground level, from the right angle, from directly in front of where the crack opened. You can see into the crevice. You can see my face. You can see me. Will the moment they discover me end everything? One of the Bigfoot sees me. Its head snaps toward the opening with a speed and precision that does not fit anything that size. No tracking lag, no gradual focus, just an instantaneous directional lock, head turning and stopping on my position as if on a pivot. Its eyes find mine through the gap. This is direct, unmistakable eye contact, and it lasts a full second, maybe slightly longer, which in this context is long enough to be geological. I have spent a lot of time in the field. I have had plenty of moments of ambiguity, wondering if I was being watched, wondering if an animal had detected me or was simply looking in my direction by coincidence. This is not one of those moments. This is the opposite of ambiguity. It sees me. It knows what I am. The decision has already been made before the eye contact ends. It disengages from the other two. It takes less than a second, and Bigfoot comes for the gap. Do I have the speed and wits to survive this direct assault? I come out of the logs the only way available, forward, fast, not standing up so much as exploding outward and converting the momentum of the exit directly into a running stride without any pause in between. There is no direction I have planned. There is no destination in my head. There is a downhill slope in front of me and dense timber, and I take the densest available line at full speed because dense means narrower gaps, and narrower gaps mean something with that body width has to decelerate to navigate them. Roots cross the ground in every direction, and I hit them at different angles with both feet and stumble twice and correct without reducing pace. Low branches hit my face and my chest. Something catches my left arm above the elbow and opens the skin, and I feel the heat of it, but not the pain yet. That comes later. Behind me, all 3 Bigfoot are in pursuit. I know this because I can hear them, and the hearing is not ambiguous. Heavy, fast footfalls that communicate through the ground as much as the air. And the sound of 3 animals that size moving at speed through dense timber is a physical phenomenon, something your sternum picks up before your ears fully process it. They are not trying to be quiet. They are not pacing themselves. They are coming. These Bigfoot are faster than me on open ground. I already know this from the way the first one dropped. That kind of power doesn't slow down on flat terrain, but I am not giving them open ground. I am threading between trees with gaps that make me slow down less than something twice my shoulder width, cutting angles through tight channels between root clusters and low branches, staying in the timber where my size is a relative advantage. Every narrow gap buys me fractions of a second compound. That is the math I am running in the back of my head, while the front of my head is entirely occupied with not dying. Are these fractions of a second enough to keep me ahead? The sound behind me is constant, and it is organized, and it is gaining. 3 sets of footfalls, each one heavy enough to resonate, and between them, the occasional crash of a branch being taken out rather than ducked, the occasional grunt of something large navigating an obstacle at speed. They communicate while they run, short, clipped vocalizations, nothing I can parse but clearly purposeful, and the fact that they are coordinating while pursuing me is a piece of information I do not have time to sit with, but that lands in my chest with real weight. I cut left hard around a tight cluster of 3 trees, and the gap between the last 2 is maybe 18 inches, and I turn my shoulders and scrape through, and I hear the closest set of footfalls adjust. Not stop, adjust, finding another line. Around the outside, I hear one of them hit something solid behind me, a trunk, a root cluster, something fixed, and the sound of impact is significant, and the footfall pattern changes after it. One set of heavy steps drops out of the rhythm. 2 Bigfoot continue. I don't celebrate and I don't adjust. I keep going. Is survival now about endurance, luck, or both? One of the Bigfoot screams, and it is close. Not 40 feet back, maybe 15, maybe closer. The sound is directional and it is aimed at me, and it is close enough that I can hear the texture of it, the way the pitch breaks and shreds at the top end. I push harder. My legs are past the point of fine motor reliability, and I am operating on the crude version. Swing and land and push and repeat, hoping the ground keeps cooperating, hoping the next root cluster is passable, hoping the gap between the next 2 trees is wide enough. The timber is beginning to space out. I can see more light ahead. The ground is getting less technical, less obstructed, and that is a mixed development. Better footing for me, but fewer tight gaps to use as speed differentials. I take what the terrain is giving me, and I run. A crash behind me, different from footfalls, different from a collision with a tree. This is the sound of a large mass going lateral, losing its feet, going down. Heavy and sudden, and followed by a few seconds of thrashing, and then the footfall pattern behind me drops to 1 set, then less than 1 set, then staggered and inconsistent. Branches snap behind me once, twice, then silence. Not fading, not trailing off into the distance. Gone. I break into an open stretch. Real light, sparse trees, the feel of the dense forest releasing me into something less compressed. The sounds behind me are absent. Not fading, absent. I do not turn around. I do not slow down to evaluate. I run until my legs simply cannot sustain the pace any longer, and then I collapse into a walk that is barely more organized than falling forward 1 step at a time. I never looked back. That felt like the right call at the moment, and it still does. Whatever was moving in those trees, whatever that three-body collision of something ancient and enormous and categorically indifferent to my presence actually constituted, it stayed in the timber. I made it out with a torn jacket, a gash above the left elbow that needed to be closed, a shoulder that went purple-green over the following 2 days, and a left eye that was partially crusted shut from debris for the better part of an evening. I made it out, and the forest behind me, when I finally stopped moving and stood still enough to listen, was completely and perfectly silent. On February 1st, 2025, a 352-pound hiker entered the Ouachita Mountains alone. Her GoPro later revealed 4 minutes of horrifying footage, showing handprints too large to be human. 3 days later, her body was found downstream with injuries no one could explain. The evidence points to what locals have feared in these mountains for decades. Carla Maddox began her day at first light on February 1st, 2025, leaving the gravel lot at 9:22 a.m. The morning felt unusually soft for winter, air heavy with resin and leaf mold, mid-50s temperatures. Her early footage is methodical. She checks straps, adjusts her pack, jokes about being in Bigfoot country. But during her first camera check at 9:34 a.m., she pauses and turns toward the tree line. The lens captures what made her stop. Underbrush bent inward at chest height, branches snapped cleanly, forming a corridor deeper into the woods than any deer trail should. She doesn't mention it. By late morning, she is 2 miles in. The trail here is a patchwork of red clay and exposed roots that turns treacherous once wet. That clay holds impressions deeply and preserves the slight shuffles of balance, how a heavier hiker compensates for slick roots where a foot slips and digs in. What it recorded that day, though, would prove far more significant. Creek crossings are shallow but dissembling. Currents funnel beneath the surface and hide loose stones that can rotate underfoot. Carla records short progress notes, stops to adjust camera angle for an overhung bench, and catalogs an unusual tree formation. The GoPro lens fogs, clears, fogs again. At 11:17 a.m., during a lingering shot of a small clearing, there is a clean, hard snap from the tree line, like tension on a large, dead branch releasing. The camera wobbles as she turns. She breathes an extra half-beat, then dismisses it to herself with a soft, indistinct phrase. On the first watch, it looks like nothing. On analysis, Waveform Review finds a low-frequency component layered under that snap, a pressure transient later matched to other recordings taken at the final crossing. That match wouldn't be made for another 2 weeks. Local records fill in context. Wildlife officers had logged stray reports in the valley the previous autumn. Hunters noting unfamiliar knocks and heavy dragging noises near creek beds, the kind of territorial behavior locals attribute to a wood ape, or locally called Bigfoot. The station considered them unremarkable at the time. The Ouachitas have a long human presence and the usual chorus of raccoon, deer, and transient boar. Those entries become relevant only because they match the pattern: intermittent, heavy impacts in the understory, and a tendency for disturbance to cluster near the same river bend where Carla would later vanish. The implications of that pattern would only surface after investigators compiled the full timeline. By mid-afternoon, the weather turns. Rain begins in earnest around 3:15 p.m., gusts flexing the pines, lowering visibility to under 100 feet. The camera shows water beating, then streaming in small rivulets down the lens before she repositions it. Her GPS track indicates a steady pace until 4:41 p.m., when she pauses at the river crossing for roughly 11 minutes. There is no corresponding video. Analysts hypothesize she powered the camera down to save battery in the storm. The site itself is one of the more unstable crossing points along the route, slope undercut by previous floods, roots exposed like the ribs of the bank. The 11-minute gap is where the forensic picture begins to deepen. Her movement pattern immediately before and after the pause shows micro variations consistent with balance correction. short lateral steps, weight shifted back onto poles, a cadence that suggests the current required careful negotiation. Then a lateral deviation appears. Her path veers toward denser trees rather than following the river's contour. GPS jitter increases technically in that span, the signal showing rapid, small-scale course corrections, evidence either of repeated attempts to find secure footing or of someone moving back and forth in a confined area. What the data couldn't show, the physical evidence would. When search teams later retraced her steps, they documented boot prints that matched her size 10 tread, interspersed with a second set of impressions. Those secondary impressions were deeper and broader and tracked a slightly different vector, angled toward the tree line, not downstream. The distance between them approached 4 feet, suggestive of a longer stride. Under the clay, the compression depth measured nearly twice that of her prints. Investigators noted no claw marks, no defined toe separations, just pressed ovals flattening the wet soil, heelless impressions that sank nearly 2 inches deeper than hers despite drier soil, extending over 15 inches in length. The full significance of those measurements wouldn't become clear until the autopsy. Technical explanations were considered and dismissed in turn. A heavier human carrying a pack could create deep impressions, but no team member, testing with multiple loads, replicated that tread or the spacing. Flood action can drag and reorient prints, but the pattern here preserved directional integrity. It pointed deliberately toward higher ground. Combined with the audio anomalies found in multiple samples, the evidence coalesced into a specific but strange picture. Something large had been present, moving with deliberate motion at the same crossing. Something that had been reported in these mountains for decades. The GoPro would confirm what those prints suggested. Her phone transmitted its final ping at 4:52 p.m., about 300 yards from the creek bend where the GoPro was later found. Signal and movement after that are unknown. Whatever happened next, her camera was still recording. The corrupted GoPro card produced a single coherent clip, 4 minutes and 7 seconds long, followed by intermittent fragments. For clarity, investigators reconstructed the clip in a frame-by-frame timeline, restoring what the damaged codec allowed and mapping audio anomalies against visible motion. What they found would force them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the valley. 00 to 040. The initial frames show a shaky, downward-facing view of wet ground, brown water sliding across red clay. The microphone catches the rush of the creek, mixed with heavy breathing and the faint rattle of trekking poles tapping against rock. Visibility is poor, fog low, light fading. Water riffles across clay. Light is flat and gray. The breathing is measured, deliberate. A faint scraping sound, consistent with pole contact on stone, repeats every few seconds. 041 to 120. The camera tilts upward, lifting to show a wider field, the river cutting through a tight bank, saplings leaning over the current. A glimpse of the Ouachita tree line appears through rainfall, dense, unmoving, the color of moss and bark. The lens captures a vertical tear in the understory, an area where branches curl inward. Carla's voice is faint but clear, a single laugh, followed by a brief remark about losing daylight, then a practical note about footing. She sounds tired, but calm. No sense of urgency yet. At 048, a sudden snap cuts through the audio, sharp, close, like a thick branch breaking under weight. The waveform shows a short, high-amplitude spike. The camera jerks left, her breathing quickens. She shifts the camera in the direction of the sound and takes 2 steps forward. Nothing visible moves in frame, but the sound repeats. Once, twice, farther back. A faint metallic click follows, possibly her trekking pole locking. Later analysis would reveal this wasn't the first time that sound had been recorded in this exact location. 121 to 200. The image stabilizes. The creek dominates the foreground. Carla steps into view, jacket soaked, hair matted to her face, then looks over her shoulder toward the tree line. The camera captures a partial reflection on the water, a blurred vertical form at the edge of the frame. She doesn't notice it. At roughly 1:36, wind drowns out her voice, and the microphone picks up a low, rhythmic sound, 2 deep pulses separated by several seconds. The waveform later showed subaudible vibration recorded as mechanical distortion, low frequency pressure strong enough to cause amplitude clipping in the lower frequency band, centered at 22 Hz. Spectral review showed mechanical distortion concentrated in the lower band, an infrasound-like pressure effect rather than a pitched call, producing amplitude clipping and a subtle warble in the ambient noise. That frequency would become critical when cross-referenced with older evidence. 2:01 to 2:30. Carla pauses, whispering a phrase that analysts later transcribed as her thinking she'd seen movement. She pans the camera to the tree line. A partial vertical blur is recorded in the edge of frame, an elongated shadow that does not match the wind-driven movement of branches. The footage then shows her stepping nearer to the water line. Her posture tightens, hands grip poles more firmly. At one point, she leans close to the lens and in a clipped voice says she thinks there's someone standing in the trees. It's not an exclamation, more an observational comment to the camera. Immediately after, the microphone captures a secondary low vocalization, softer but continuous beneath the creek noise, a rumbling, low-frequency growl. On the waveform, the 2-note pulse and the growl overlap briefly, creating a complex interference pattern. What that pattern meant wouldn't be understood until weeks later. 2:31 to 3:10. The camera turns downstream, facing away from the tree line. Mud swirls in a ring near the bank, an area of disturbed current appearing off-frame. The pattern is consistent with a large object entering the shallow water just beyond view. The lens catches a smear of darker color moving parallel to the bank, too broad and too slow for a deer or boar. Carla breathes hard. Her muttering increases in pace. A sharp thud sounds in the audio, impact against water or a submerged object. Immediately afterward, the growl intensifies and a second distinct impact resonates. The two events are nearly synchronous with the change in the reflected light on the creek surface. The next 45 seconds would contain the most disturbing evidence yet recovered from the Ouachitas. 3:11 to 3:45. The frame tilts upward sharply, almost as if the camera is pulled by force. The image is unstable. Trees streak past in quick blurs, and for a moment, a tall, vertical silhouette crosses the right edge of the frame, its proportions long and upright. The silhouette does not resolve into a known animal profile. The recording captures a final, elongated exhalation, an audible breath that differs in timbre from Carla's, and then a visceral sound identified by investigators as a short, high-pitched human cry. It is layered unusually in the spectrum and, on forensic playback, does not match the timbre profile of her earlier voice samples. The reason for that mismatch would become apparent during the autopsy. 3:46 to 4:07. At 3:57, there's a muffled exclamation, unclear whether from fear or surprise, followed by a violent jolt that throws the camera forward and a sudden impact and splash. The camera tilts sharply, landing half submerged. Water splashes across the lens in violent sheets. For 3 seconds, the image is underwater, bubbles racing past the lens. After the camera re-emerges, 4 corrupted frames, each lasting only a fraction of a second, were later recovered and enhanced. They show a towering, dark shape leaning over the lens, a massive shadow with a broad shoulder line and a long limb obstructing the view. The frames are grainy and partially saturated by water, but when sequenced, they suggest an upright creature momentarily above the camera before the feed collapses into static. that wasn't the last piece of footage the card would yield. The audio ends on a low-frequency wash, and then silence. That clip was recovered from a GoPro found downstream of the Ouachita River Trail. Authorities later confirmed that the scream heard in the footage wasn't hers. Forensic audio technicians later ran the clip through multiple filters. The analysis emphasized a strong, low-frequency signature present as mechanical rumble and harmonic artifacts. Technicians described the effect as an infrasound-like pressure band layered beneath the recording rather than a distinct tonal call. It remained an acoustic profile unmatched by any documented Arkansas mammal. Wildlife acoustic experts consulted on the file reported that while large bears can produce powerful low-frequency noises, the pattern and sustain of this recorded sound, combined with the timing of impacts and the absence of claw or bite damage visible in the footage, did not align with known bear behavior. The biological samples recovered 3 days later would rule out bears entirely. That mismatch became a central puzzle. The footage placed something large and deliberate at the crossing, producing low-frequency vocalizations, moving with an upright posture, and interacting with the water in a way that left distinct hydrodynamic signatures. The final corrupted frames offered a visual hint, brief, distorted, of an upright mass above the camera. No known predator in Arkansas makes a call that low or that's sustained. But the locals knew what to do. 3 days after that footage ended, a joint search and rescue unit located the body of 36-year-old Carla Maddox roughly 9/10 of a mile downstream from her last GPS ping, a distance consistent with the creek's elevated flow during peak runoff. Her remains were found lodged between 2 fallen trees, partially submerged, her hiking jacket visible through silted water. What they found on her body would change the investigation entirely. The official search began at sunrise on February 2, 2025. Crews from 3 neighboring counties joined the operation, fanning out in staggered lines along both sides of the river. The priority was locating the source of the last GPS signal and any trace of equipment that could indicate movement after transmission loss. By mid-morning, a thermal sweep registered a brief temperature differential along the west bank, likely ground or water temperature variance from disturbed soil or retained warmth. Then it faded on the next pass. It was logged as environmental interference until ground teams reached the same grid and discovered Carla's backpack caught against a root cluster. One shoulder strap was torn clean through, not frayed or cut. The pack's frame was bent inward, as if compressed by weight rather than impact. The scatter pattern of her gear would prove crucial to understanding what happened. Nearby, the ground showed parallel drag impressions leading toward the creek. Investigators initially assumed the marks were caused by flood debris until they followed the line farther. Both impressions ended abruptly at the bank, where the soil dipped sharply and the same broad, heelless prints appeared in pairs heading into the water. The tracks re-emerged on the opposite side before fading into dense growth. At 5:02 p.m., a ranger's dash cam positioned along the access road captured faint, distant screams. The timestamp matched her final GPS ping almost exactly. Wind distortion obscured most of the recording, but analysis later isolated a single human voice, followed by a deep exhalation, longer and lower in tone than the scream itself. That audio would resurface weeks later with additional context that changed everything. Radio transmissions from that evening reflected growing unease among search units reporting movement near the West Ridge and intermittent audio returns without any visual confirmation. By sunset, field leads ordered a coordinated pullback due to failing light. More than one team member later admitted the same thing, the feeling of being watched the entire time, especially near the tree line where those massive prints disappeared. The discovery occurred on the morning of February 4, 2025, after crews used aerial mapping to trace debris caught along the flooded banks. Carla, who weighed 352 pounds, had been hiking alone despite a storm advisory issued that afternoon. Investigators confirmed her phone had transmitted its final location signal at 4:52 p.m. near a low-lying river crossing, a half-mile from where the GoPro was eventually found. Her gear was scattered in a pattern investigators struggled to explain. The trekking poles were discovered upstream, wedged between roots. The pack lay farther down, strap torn clean through. The right boot surfaced another 50 yards away. None of it suggested an ordinary fall or current drag. The autopsy would confirm those suspicions. Recovery required lifting the entangled branches piece by piece to avoid further damage. The initial scene report listed no external trauma consistent with collision or animal attack. However, responders noted deep discoloration beneath the jacket along both upper arms and ribs, a mirrored pattern of circular bruising that made even seasoned rescuers step back. The full extent of those injuries was still unknown. The body of Carla Maddox arrived at the county coroner's facility at 6:17 a.m. on February 6th, 4 days after her disappearance. The ambient temperature inside the intake bay was kept at 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Condensation trailed down the stainless steel doors. A constant tap from the prep sink echoed under the fluorescent lights. The official cause of death was still unlisted when examination began. Following preservation in cold storage, the external assessment documented residual swelling consistent with prior submersion in cold water. Her clothing was cut away, laid flat, and photographed for fiber transfer. Each layer was coated in silt. Fragments of river debris were embedded in the fabric folds. No tearing or bite perforations appeared on any layer. Along both upper arms, large symmetrical bruises stood out, deep purple ovals forming a mirrored pattern that extended into the soft tissue. When measured, the centers of each contusion were spaced roughly 3 inches apart, in parallel rows, curving around the limbs as though from immense pressure applied by digits. The marks looked like the outline of hands, far larger than any humans. What those measurements meant became clear only after additional evidence surfaced. Initial palpation suggested rib fractures, later confirmed by post-mortem radiograph as ribs 3 to 6 on the right side. The breaks angled inward. The impact vector suggested compressive force delivered laterally, not the crushing collapse of a fall. The coroner noted that such localized pressure would require strength beyond ordinary human capacity. On the skin just below the right scapula, a faint impression in drying lividity formed the outline of a single hand, approximately 13 inches in total length, measured from the heel of the palm to the tip of the middle finger along the natural curvature. The biological samples recovered next would provide the most definitive proof yet. During cranial and facial inspection, mud was discovered in the nasal passages and larynx, indicating that she was alive when submerged. Microscopic examination showed aspiration of fine sediment particles matching creek composition. No defensive lacerations were present on the hands or forearms, only linear abrasions along the outer wrists, consistent with being pulled through coarse material. Trace collection followed. Under the left thumbnail, a small quantity of fibrous matter was recovered, coarse brown strands measuring over 3 inches in length. Under magnification, the fibers exhibited a keratin sheath thicker than that of human or known animal samples. The cuticle pattern was irregular, overlapping in scales rather than the uniform rings seen in domestic mammals. Preliminary comparison against reference libraries returned no match. DNA sequencing would reveal why. Each sample was sealed and logged for DNA sequencing. The official entry noted the anomaly as organic filament, source undetermined. The coroner's dictation recorded the key injuries: compression fractures of ribs 3 to 6, bilateral upper arm contusions with 3-inch spacing, absence of tearing or bite marks, and pulmonary asphyxia secondary to drowning. The pathologist added a brief remark in the margin: Grip strength indicated by pattern exceeds known human range. Laboratory technicians processed fluids and tissue samples through standard panels. No intoxicants, sedatives, or animal toxins were detected. The overall trauma presented as concentrated external compression followed by drowning, not collision, not predation. Late that afternoon, while the coroner finalized documentation, an assistant reviewed the recovered GoPro card one last time under cleanroom conditions. The file structure showed a hidden fragment appended to the corrupted end of the clip, 2 additional seconds previously unreadable. Audio only, no visual data. When isolated, the segment revealed a deep inhalation close to the microphone, followed by a single footstep pressing into wet ground. The step produced a suction sound typical of heavy weight on saturated soil. The sequence ended there. The implications were immediate and unsettling. The technician logged the discovery and attached the clip to the evidence packet. Its timing placed it at least 4 seconds after the point where water engulfed the lens after Carla's final audible breath. The recording implied that the camera continued to operate briefly once removed from the water, handled by something else. No further contact was captured. By evening, the report remained open, pending DNA confirmation. The official line on the preliminary certificate read, "Cause of death, asphyxia by drowning, secondary to assault by unidentified external source." The coroner refrained from speculation beyond physical evidence. Yet the phrasing of the final note, compression consistent with bilateral grasp, quietly suggested the shape of the unseen mechanism. Down the hall in the evidence lab, the assistant replayed the recovered fragment again at half speed. The inhalation was unmistakably deep, diaphragm-driven, resonant enough to vibrate the low-frequency range of the speaker cones. Between that breath and the step, a faint harmonic pattern registered, a tremor too regular for background noise. If she was already underwater, who or what was holding the camera? 3 days after the autopsy, a multidisciplinary review convened at the state's Wildlife Forensics Division to consolidate the remaining evidence, audio, biological, and environmental, and determine whether any of it could be explained by known species interaction. The meeting drew unusual attention for a drowning case. The cross-references they were about to make would tie together years of unexplained incidents. The recovered GoPro footage played in short bursts over the conference speakers, its low-frequency pressure more felt than heard. Comparative analysis revealed something unprecedented. The pulse pattern recorded in Carla Maddox's footage, 2 deep surges separated by roughly 3 seconds, matched an archival anomaly from 2018 recorded during a missing persons search near the Kiamichi River, 60 miles southwest. Both contained identical subaudible signatures once dismissed as environmental vibration. That classification no longer fit. The biological evidence would confirm what the audio suggested. Biological review followed. The coarse brown strands recovered from beneath Carla's thumbnail were compared against an older entry, sample number A 17433, logged in 2018. Both displayed identical keratin thickness and irregular cuticle overlap. The earlier strand had come from bark near another unverified sighting. Degraded mitochondrial sequences showed partial primate markers. Cross-reference tests confirmed a 94% sequence similarity across amplified regions. Analysts estimated the probability of unrelated contamination producing identical anomalies as low based on regional sample comparisons. The thermal imaging recovered next would provide visual confirmation. A damaged motion-triggered wildlife camera recovered near the site added a third layer. Its final infrared frame, time-stamped at 4:53 p.m., 1 minute after Carla's last phone signal, captured a tall, upright heat mass moving mid-stride along the creek. The proportions suggested a figure over 7 feet tall with a bipedal gait. The thermal reading registered cooler than human but warmer than the environment, consistent with an insulated body mass. The following frame was corrupted beyond recovery. Internal correspondence showed disagreement between divisions. The wildlife branch classified the image as an anthropogenic misclassification, implying a distorted human presence. The forensic unit rejected that, noting the infrared temperature differential was incompatible with human physiology. Their joint statement was reduced to one phrase: source undetermined. The audio cross-correlation would settle the debate. Audio specialists later cross-correlated both the 2018 and 2025 clips. The results revealed identical harmonic distortion centered at 22 Hz. No known Arkansas mammal nor environmental condition produces rhythmic pulses of that frequency. When the waveform was amplified, a subtle modulation emerged, one that rose and fell like inhalation. One analyst noted it, aligned perfectly with the deep inhalation recovered in the GoPro's final fragment. The implication: the same biological mechanism was active in both recordings, years apart, across nearly identical terrain. The review ended without consensus, but the compiled data, primate keratin, infrasound pulses, a bipedal heat signature, outlined something neither animal nor human. Whatever left its trace in that valley hadn't vanished. It had stayed close. And there was still one more piece of evidence waiting to be found. The official case summary was released on February 10, 2025. It described the incident as a hiking misadventure resulting in accidental drowning. The sheriff's statement emphasized weather conditions, unstable terrain, and limited daylight as contributing factors. No reference was made to the bruising pattern, the unknown fibers, or the recovered GoPro footage. The file was closed with no pending criminal investigation. The public version told only part of the story. Local reaction was immediate. Residents who lived along the lower Ouachita ridges questioned the official conclusion, citing years of unverified sightings and unexplained noises in that same stretch of forest. Within days, hunters operating along the western watershed uploaded footage showing large, barefoot impressions pressed into saturated clay, similar to those found near Carla's last known location. The video was dismissed publicly as inconclusive. Within 2 weeks, an expedited state laboratory analysis returned the DNA report. The analysis listed the organic fibers recovered from beneath Carla's thumbnail as containing unidentified primate DNA with partial human correspondence. The sequence was incomplete, degraded by water exposure, yet distinct enough to rule out contamination. The result could not be categorized under any known North American species. The file was forwarded to a private research consultant, where it remains archived under restricted classification. One final piece of audio remained undiscovered. The coroner updated the internal notes but did not amend the public record. The official narrative, accidental fall, fatal submersion, stood unchanged. Internally, though, several staff members acknowledged the evidence suggested direct physical contact. The handprint, the rib fractures, the grip bruising, each detail implied deliberate force. For the first time, physical evidence suggested a human-like primate was responsible, a creature long rumored in these woods: Bigfoot. Weeks later, one last piece of audio surfaced. A data technician revisiting archival files discovered the Ranger dashcam from February 1st still contained unreleased footage. The vehicle was stationary, parked along the access road 2 miles from the crossing. The clip begins with rainfall and static interference. 40 seconds in, a single, heavy exhale cuts through the noise. Slow, deliberate, drawn out until it fades into the rhythm of the storm. Then come 3 footsteps, each separated by long pauses, the last one fading until only rain remains. That audio was logged, time-stamped, and stored with the rest of the evidence. it was never publicly released. If it dragged her into the river that night, where did it go after? Marie Christina Marquez, Tina to the people who knew her, is moving briskly along a trail that cuts through second-growth Douglas fir somewhere in the foothills east of the Cascades. She has a day pack on her back, trekking poles in her hands, and the look of someone who has been out longer than she planned and wants to get home before dark. The trail cam catches her at a slight angle from above, mounted maybe 8 feet up on a cedar post, and in that first frame she looks completely ordinary. A woman on a hike, doing what hikers do, watching the trail ahead. But she isn't watching the trail ahead. She's watching what's behind her. And in those first few seconds of footage, that detail is everything. She turns twice in the span of maybe 30 seconds, not the casual glance of someone who heard a bird or a branch snap, the kind of look where she pivots her whole body, stops moving, and stares back down the trail for a solid 2 or 3 seconds each time. Bigfoot has already gotten her attention. Bigfoot has already reached into her nervous system and pulled a wire loose, and then the camera catches what she can't see yet. At the far left edge of the frame, barely visible in the tree line where the light is already failing, there is a shape that doesn't belong. Bigfoot is standing still among the firs, set back maybe 40 feet from the trail edge, and it is tall. Tall in a way that no black bear stands, tall in a way that no human being stands, tall in the particular way of something that has mass and height and presence all working together into a silhouette that makes the rational part of your brain throw its hands up and go quiet. Right from the first frame, something is off. The trail cams out in that area weren't installed to capture anything like this. They were monitoring deer movement patterns for a state wildlife survey. Whatever found Tina that evening was not supposed to be there, and yet here Bigfoot is. She moves through the next section of trail at a pace that's climbing toward a jog without quite getting there. That particular human gear where your legs want to run, but your pride or your fear won't let them. The gear where you're trying to look composed while everything inside you is screaming. Could she keep this facade long enough to survive? The trail cam picks her up again about 60 yards further on, a second unit mounted near a creek crossing, and in this footage, the environmental context has shifted noticeably. The trees along this stretch have been worked over, not by wind, not by any weather event. Several of the smaller pines flanking the trail have had their lower bark stripped in long vertical patches, the exposed wood pale and raw against the dark forest floor, fresh enough that the cambium is still wet-looking in the footage. There are branches on the ground that didn't fall. Bigfoot snapped them cleanly from heights of 7 or 8 feet, the break points splintered in the way you get when something applies sudden downward force rather than the ragged tearing of weather damage. And in the mud along the creek bank, partially captured at the bottom of the frame, there are depressions in the ground that are unmistakably Bigfoot's footprints. The shape is humanoid. The size is not. Each impression is roughly 18 inches long and maybe 8 inches across at the ball of the foot, the toe marks pressed deep and individually distinct. Whatever made those tracks was heavy enough that it sank 2 inches into ground that Tina's own boots are barely marking. In the trail cam footage, I could see her notice the footprints. You can tell because she stops at the creek crossing for a moment, her poles going still, and she looks down at the bank with the frozen posture of someone whose brain is processing something that their worldview doesn't have a category for yet. She stands there for maybe 4 seconds. Then she steps across the creek and keeps moving, faster now, and she pulls something from her jacket pocket. Her phone. She holds it out ahead of her at chest height, not quite filming, not quite calling, just holding it like a tether to something familiar, something that exists in the same world as cell towers and pizza delivery and people who would answer if she called. Will the comfort of technology be enough to keep her grounded? Her phone was recording audio the entire time. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this case, because what the audio captured in the stretch after the creek crossing is something that the trail cam footage alone can't fully communicate. The trail cams give you the visual, the shape of what happened, the geography of it, the terrible spatial logic. But the audio gives you the texture, the atmosphere. It gives you what Tina was actually inside of. The sounds start low, They're easy to miss under the ambient noise of the creek fading behind her and her own footfalls on the trail. But they're there, a subsonic pressure more than a sound, the kind of frequency that a human chest cavity registers as unease before the ears process it as a noise at all. Then it sharpens into something identifiable. Bigfoot's rhythmic guttural vocalization coming from the tree line to her left, low and deliberate, with a cadence that is nothing like any wildlife call that has a clean scientific explanation. It repeats. Not randomly, it repeats with the consistency of something communicating, spacing each utterance with what sounds like intentional pause, like punctuation. And then, from further away and to her right, a different voice answers it. Lower in register, longer in duration, with a resonant quality that the phone's microphone clearly struggles with, clipping at the peaks of each exhalation. Two distinct vocalizations, two distinct sources. She is between them. Notice how precise the movement is on the footage at this point. The trail cam northeast of the creek crossing, the third unit in the sequence, shows Bigfoot emerging from the tree line behind her. Not charging, not thrashing through the brush, but moving with a measured, quiet deliberateness along the edge of the trail, maybe 30 feet back and closing slowly. The creature's gait is long and unhurried. It isn't chasing her, it's pacing her. There's a difference, and the footage makes that difference absolutely clear. Bigfoot isn't trying to catch Tina. Bigfoot is steering her. She tries to fight the noise. That's what you have to understand about what comes next. Tina isn't passive in this footage. She's not frozen or hysterical. She picks up a fallen branch from the trail edge, something maybe 3 feet long and wrist thick, and she starts banging it against the trunk of a tree as she walks. A rhythmic, sharp crack over and over, the sound carrying through the trees in all directions. The audio on her phone makes this thunderous and immediate, each impact clean and hard. It's a reasonable instinct. Noise deters most wildlife, disrupts their comfort zone, gives you the psychological initiative. For a bear or a cougar, it probably works most of the time. But what if this instinct backfires entirely? For Bigfoot, it accomplishes the opposite. The trail cam footage is unambiguous on this point. The moment Tina starts banging the branch, the creature behind her closes the distance by roughly 10 feet in the span of a few seconds. Not running, not startled into aggression, just adjusting its pace the way you would if someone ahead of you on a street suddenly slowed down. The vocalizations from the audio respond to the answering call from her right flank becoming more frequent, the intervals between utterances shortening. She's ringing a dinner bell. She's marking her location with a precision that renders her impossible to lose. And when she bangs again, louder this time, putting real force into it. The footage shows Bigfoot stepping fully onto the trail behind her, into the open, no longer bothering with the tree line. Every warning she tries to make, yelling, banging, seems to draw them closer. You can almost feel the panic shifting in her, the animal part of her brain beginning to override the rational response. Because what do you do when every instinct you have turns out to be exactly wrong? She finds the rock outcrop at 6:11 p.m., according to the trail cam timestamp. It rises off the right side of the trail like a small natural fortress, maybe 12 feet of tilted granite ledge with enough handholds to climb and enough elevation to give her a vantage point, a defensible position. You can see her calculating it. She hesitates for only a second at the base, then she commits, jamming her trekking poles through the straps of her daypack to free her hands and going at the rock face with a speed and efficiency that speaks to experience. Someone who has climbed before, someone who knows what her body can do. She gets 7 or 8 feet up in about 10 seconds, and for a brief moment, maybe 3 seconds, she's above it all. Her head swings around, scanning the forest floor, breathing hard but moving well. Bigfoot reaches the base of the outcrop before she makes it to the top. The footage here is the most physically confrontational sequence in the entire recording, and it is difficult to watch with any detachment whatsoever. The creature, moving with a speed that is startling relative to everything that's come before, a sudden gear change from that measured pace into something decisive and fast, closes the distance to the rock face and reaches up to close a hand around her left ankle. The grip is enough to arrest her upward movement completely, dead stopping a woman who was moving with momentum, and then she is pulled downward, not with wild violence, but with an irresistible steady force. back toward the ground. She swings the trekking pole she managed to pull from her pack, and it connects. The footage shows the pole whipping through a thick mass of dark hair, and the audio carries the impact. But Bigfoot doesn't release her, doesn't flinch in any meaningful way. She lands hard at the base of the outcrop, stumbles, gets her feet back under her, and that's when she sees the second one. And there it is, 2 of them. The footage makes this crystal clear, coordinated, intelligent behavior, executed with a fluency that implies not just instinct, but planning. They aren't animals that happen to converge on the same location. The positioning is tactical. How do you react when the danger doubles in an instant? The second Bigfoot is above her. It had apparently moved to the high end of the outcrop while the first was below, and it stands at the top of the granite ledge now, blocking any upward route with a mass and presence that makes the rock face suddenly meaningless as an escape option. 7 feet tall at minimum, maybe more. The trail cam angle makes precise estimation difficult, but the scale against the surrounding trees is unmistakable. The creature stands without urgency, without the aggressive display you'd expect from a territorial animal, without anything that looks like fear or excitement. It just stands there, occupying the high ground, and watches her. The effect on Tina is immediate and total. She backs away from the outcrop, and in backing away, she moves exactly where the terrain wants her to go, back onto the main trail. And then, because Bigfoot on the trail behind her has resumed that slow, measured approach, she turns onto the narrower branch trail that cuts to the left. She takes it fast, breaking into an actual run now, trekking pole swinging, and the audio fills with the sound of her breathing, raw and ragged, the kind of breathing that comes when the body has committed everything to movement. The narrow trail curves to the left in a long arc. It is, though she doesn't know this yet, a loop trail, a natural cul-de-sac that curves back on itself in a roughly half-mile arc and deposits you exactly where you entered it. There is no exit at the far end. It is, in the most brutal possible sense, a trap. And whether or not Bigfoot knew that, whether or not the intelligence at work here included a spatial understanding of that trail system, the 2 creatures are now positioned precisely to take advantage of it. Could she realize the trap before it closes completely around her? The loop trail has 3 trail cams on it, originally placed to monitor elk movement through the corridor, and what they collectively capture over the next 11 minutes is the most complete and most harrowing sequence in the entire footage record. Tina moves through the corridor at a pace that oscillates between full run and stumbling jog, catching herself on roots and rocks, losing a trekking pole somewhere in the first quarter mile. Her day pack shifted half off one shoulder. The loop itself is roughly half a mile end to end, curving in a tight arc through old-growth fir and hemlock, the trail surface uneven, with decades of root growth heaving the dirt into ridges and hollows that are manageable at a walking pace and treacherous at a run. The forest in here is denser than the main trail, the canopy lower, the light almost entirely gone now. The trail cams have switched to infrared, rendering everything in flat silver-white gradients that give the footage an additional layer of unreality, like something recorded in a different dimension entirely. Bigfoot moves through it on both sides. Not on the trail, parallel to it, maybe 20 feet into the trees on each flank, visible on the trail cam footage as large, heat-radiating shapes moving steadily through the underbrush with a silence that seems impossible given their mass. The audio catches the occasional shift of weight on the forest floor, the sound of something large displacing brush, but no crashing, no snapping of branches, no noise that would give away position or distance. They are quieter than she is. They are faster than she is moving. And they are on both sides, maintaining spacing, neither closing nor falling back, simply keeping pace and containing the corridor. It's terrifying. She's moving faster, but the loop doesn't give her a way out. The camera angles capture this like a predator's choreography, every position deliberate, every interval maintained. What you're watching is a system working exactly as intended. Can she outthink a plan that seems smarter than a human mind? She realizes the trail is looping back at the 6:19 p.m. mark. You can tell because she slows suddenly, and the way she slows is different from exhaustion. It's the slowing of comprehension, of a terrible realization landing. She would have recognized the terrain, a particular bent cedar or a rock formation she'd passed 8 minutes earlier, and understood in that moment what the geography meant. The audio goes quiet except for her breathing, which has dropped from the frantic rhythm of full exertion to something more controlled, more careful, and somehow more frightening for it. She stops completely, stands in the middle of the trail, looks left and looks right, looks back the way she came. The shapes in the tree line on both sides have also stopped, those enormous heat signatures going still in the infrared, patient and absolute. The audio picks up the vocalization again, the low guttural call, and this time it comes from very close, maybe 15 feet into the trees to her left, close enough that the phone's microphone captures a texture to it, a chest resonance, a warmth of proximity. She turns toward it. Bigfoot steps partially into the trail corridor from the right flank, visible at the edge of infrared range, and she pivots to face that instead. The first Bigfoot materializes at the back of the corridor behind her, the entry point of the loop, blocking the only route back to the main trail. The second moves in from the right, closing the gap between its previous position and the trail edge with the same calm deliberateness that has characterized every movement throughout this footage. She is in the center of a triangle that is contracting steadily, with no seam she can find and no gap she can force open. She starts moving again, forward, toward the loop exit back to the main trail, the only geometry that makes any sense. And she is moving fast, but the roots in this section of trail are thick and interlocking, and the infrared footage turns the ground into a high-contrast maze of light and shadow that conceals depth. She trips. Not a stumble she catches herself from. A full, committed fall, both hands hitting the ground, her chin narrowly missing a root, her day pack swinging forward over her head and dumping onto the trail in front of her. The audio records the impact, and then a sound from her that is not a scream exactly, more like the involuntary expulsion of air that comes when fear becomes physical, when the body finally accepts what the mind has been trying to process. She gets one hand under herself, starts to push up, and Bigfoot is already there. The first creature reaches her in 2 strides from somewhere. The camera barely captured it approaching. The speed is shocking after so much patience. The same gear change that happened at the rock outcrop, from stillness to decisive motion without any intermediate step. One large hand comes down on her upper back with a pressure that pins her to the trail without the force of a strike, the kind of controlled application of weight that is more frightening than violence would be, because it is precise. She struggles, twisting at the waist, swinging her remaining trekking pole one-handed, and the audio carries her voice now. Words, not just sounds. Words directed at the creature above her, the specific words indistinct under the ambient noise, but the cadence of them clear. A sustained attempt to communicate, to reach something in the intelligence she had clearly, by this point, accepted was there. Could communication work when survival depends on submission? The second Bigfoot approaches from the front. It moves to the day pack that has spilled onto the trail ahead of her, and it does something that stops the breath in anyone who has ever watched this footage for the first time. It reaches into the pack, not randomly, not with the chaotic investigation of an animal going through human belongings for food. It searches with a purpose. It moves aside the water bottle, the first aid kit, the rain shell, and it finds, or more accurately, retrieves, as if it knew exactly what it was looking for, the length of the paracord that Tina had stored in a side pocket of the pack, standard hiking gear, 30 feet of braided nylon cord, the kind of thing any experienced hiker carries. Bigfoot draws it out, examines it for barely a second, and moves toward her. You can see the intelligence here, using the rope. They're handling her like they've done this before, or at the very least, like they understand the concept of restraint. That's the part that I can't stop thinking about. Not the strength, not the size, the understanding. The binding takes less time than you would expect. The second Bigfoot works at her wrists first, while the first maintains the pressure on her back, and though she struggles, the audio is full of the sounds of it, the friction of cord on ground, the impact of her feet against the trail as she tries to push herself forward. The outcome is not in doubt from the moment it begins. Her wrists are secured behind her, then her ankles. She is moved, carefully without roughness, with a handling that is almost methodical in its gentleness relative to the force that preceded it, to the base of a large Douglas fir at the edge of the trail. The final trail cam in the loop sequence catches this in full infrared. Tina sitting with her back against the tree, her bound wrists behind her, her legs extended and bound at the ankle. Both Bigfoot creatures are standing over her, still looking down. She is still talking. The audio catches it, her voice steady now in a way that sounds less like calm and more like the particular mental state you reach when panic has run its full course and the body simply doesn't have the resources to maintain it anymore. The words are still mostly indistinct, but the delivery is measured, deliberate, the cadence of someone who has decided that communication is the only remaining option and is committing to it completely. One of the creatures responds. The audio captures it clearly. The low vocalization, close, directed downward toward where she is sitting, different in character from the territorial calls that punctuated the earlier footage. Less loud, but more considered. She responds to it. It responds to her. This exchange, if that's what it is, and I believe that's what it is, lasts for approximately 40 seconds. Is dialogue enough when danger towers over you? The trail cam cuts out at 6:31 p.m. Not a slow fade, not a low battery shutdown sequence. An abrupt, instantaneous end to the recording, as if the power supply was physically interrupted. The footage simply stops. One frame there is the infrared image. The tree, Tina tied against it, the two massive shapes of Bigfoot standing over her in the flat silver light. The next frame is nothing. The camera never recorded again. Her phone was found 6 days later in her abandoned day pack, recovered from the loop trail by a search and rescue team working the area after she was reported missing. Tina Marquez was never found.